everybody's be this way, but let me know before you speak.
Okay,
So
so
are you gonna, she's gonna introduce you, and then you're gonna speak for you, and then you're gonna like pass it back.
yeah,
And you'll be like, hey, I also.
no.
I just go straight to the scripts.
How do we know when you're done? Good enough. Pretty much. Just to make sure. That hopefully this will, nobody touches anything. It's great and. Okay, that's.
It's only one. It's only one, and then we're not.
I'm gonna take care of that, because once I mute you, nobody's gonna be here for. Right. Yeah. From this mic some. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Everyone is being allowed to.
Hey, can you just let me know when I should, because everybody's on mute here right now. So if you can-
Welcome to the CPUSA International Conference 2023. We stand in an unprecedented time in modern history. The old monopolar world order is coming to an end, and a new multilateral world is emerging. It is crucial that we understand the ever-changing global dynamics that continue to shift away from Western hegemony. To this end, we have invited guests from organizations and fraternal parties from all over the world to speak on their experiences and efforts, so that we can all deepen our understanding of our shared goals and how we can work together to achieve them. To an unprecedented extent, the youth of today are disillusioned with capitalism. In an age in which information is more easily accessed than ever, and communication across continents is possible in an instant, the old lies that once justified capitalism's violence and exploitation have become easier to see through. The revolutionary spirit of young people demonstrates that. Our collective energy must be focused with lessons of the past and analysis of the present. This conference will be another historic event for our party, as we are all once again brought together for the cause of internationalism and anti-imperialism. Thank you all for coming, and we hope you enjoy the presentations prepared by our own party and the many invited speakers, organizations, and fraternal parties from around the world. Comrades and friends, the CPUSA International Conference 2023
Welcome, everyone, to the second International Conference on Imperialism hosted by the Communist Party USA International Department. We have an exciting bill of speakers and presentations prepared for you all today. We are very honored to have received so many greetings from our fraternal parties around the world, and we regret that there isn't time to show them all. Please remember to visit the International Department's YouTube channel, where all of the messages from our fraternal parties and all of the presentations and discussions from today will be uploaded. Before we begin, we would like to direct any comrade interested in anti-imperialist work to cpusa.org/join and redworldreview.org/sign up to learn more and get involved in anti-imperialist organizing. To start off this year's conference, Comrade Rosana Cambron will be delivering a keynote address introducing this year's historic conference and addressing the topic of Cold War 2.0, as well as our party's responsibilities regarding internationalism and anti-imperialism. Let's welcome our co-chair and give them the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you find yourselves, comrades. We are very happy to gather together in unity with you for this important event. Today's conference on imperialism focuses on the fight for working class internationalism and solidarity in our struggle for socialism, justice, and peace. This powerful concepts have their origins in the manifesto and its historic slogan, "Workers of the World Unite." Yes, Marx and Engels saw international working class unity as key to breaking the chains that bind us. Indeed, Marx himself later warned that the threat to such unity posed by the policies of capitalist governments pitting workers of different countries against each other. Lenin, too, sounded a similar warning inherent in the rising new imperialism that leads to increased militarism and wars for world domination. But workers have no interest in fighting each other. Consistent anti-imperialism, he stressed, must be the only answer to wars of conquest. Following Lenin, the world communist movement made anti-imperialism a centerpiece of its policies, and for good reason. War has been a constant presence ever since. Indeed, the history of the last century has been one of countless workers dying in such conflicts, no matter what their slogans or rationales. Today's Cold War 2.0 continues this offensive. China, Cuba, and Venezuela are its main targets as the US attempts to build international coalitions to roll back progress and socialism. The world, however, has changed. It's grown more multipolar, along with old inter-imperialist rivalries between the US, the European Union, and Japan. New centers of power are emerging along with new alliances. With over 800 military bases scattered across the planet and largely dominant positions in the world economy, however, the US remains the leading imperialist country. We are living in dangerous times. New immigration, health, and climate change crises are unfolding, along with the outbreak of war in Europe, Africa, and Middle East. They pose serious threats to life on the planet. Today, imperialist globalization is devastating economies with tens of millions attempting to escape poverty, only to be met with cages and militarized borders in some cases, or left to drown in the high seas in others. US imperialism is responding to the crisis with protectionism and trade wars, information wars, surrogate conflicts around the world, and a military budget now exceeding $1 trillion a year. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO has continued to expand eastward, directed at Russia. The outbreak of war in Ukraine has led to Sweden and Finland applying to join the military alliance, with Sweden's recent admittance. As our national committee recently said, the Ukraine war must end. Russia must withdraw its troops and NATO must stop its expansion. That's the only way Ukraine can ever be sovereign. China and South Africa's peace proposals have pointed a way to bringing this about. The Biden administration must remove the cluster bombs and cease funding the war. No country can be free so as long as the US pursues hegemony. Our party understands it has a special responsibility to build movements among the US people to challenge these policies. In November, we're hosting a peace conference of party activists to begin organizing our work. Our emphasis is to build a working class-led peace movement. We need a broad front for peace that must be brought into next year's elections and the effort to defeat the fascist right and change the current administration's foreign policies. We accept the challenges agreed to at the 22nd International Meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties in Havana last year to the struggle against imperialism, to contribute to transforming the current unjust and undemocratic international order, and to work for an international order based on peace. We work closely with our fraternal parties in many joint projects. The Hello Comrade program had 3 successful exchanges with fraternal parties in Portugal, Cuba, and Chile. It is considering a new exchange project with a fraternal party next year. Cuba is a special target, and we pledge to continue to work to end the blockade and normalize relations between our 2 countries. Removing Cuba from the state sponsors of terrorist list is a top priority. In holding this conference, we seek to enhance our internationalist work and strengthen our fraternal ties by having a rich exchange of ideas. We believe the key insights of our fraternal parties to be of the utmost importance to our continued growth and development. You will hear many veteran voices and young voices for socialism today. Dear all, we invite you to become part of this global movement for peace and socialism. You are invited to join us and join with us in the common fight. Venceremos.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. Up next is the National Network on Cuba, or NNOC, and they have prepared a presentation on the illegal blockade on Cuba. The NNOC is a coalition of 57 different organizations, including the CPUSA, other progressive parties, peace organizations, faith groups, and communities, united in our goal of ending the US war on Cuba, lifting all sanctions, and taking Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. The NNOC has been engaged in a long history of anti-imperialist work in building a broad coalition to free the Cuban people from the tyranny of the US blockade. We would like to thank our comrades and friends in the NNOC for their presentation and welcome them to the floor.
Hello, everyone. As Kyla mentioned, I'm Shaquille Fontenot, one of the co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba, and we are a coalition of 57 member orgs working collectively against illegal and inhumane U.S. economic war against Cuba through the use of sanctions. We're also actively campaigning and organizing to demand Biden remove Cuba from the U.S.-issued state sponsors of terrorism list. And also want to shout out the Low Country Action Committee of Charleston, South Carolina, which is also a member of the Black Alliance for Peace and the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression. So before I get into the SSOT campaign, I'm really here to mobilize us, all organizers, comrades, friends, and siblings in the struggle for human dignity and freedom. As advocates for a just and self-determinate world order, we must firmly denounce the imperialist actions that undermine the rights and sovereignty of nations like Cuba. We're in a dire situation because our world is witnessing these frenzied efforts by the United States to preserve its position as a global hegemon. And there's a pressing need for continued worker organization and cross-organizational collaboration in the face of heightened imperialist aggression. So as we gather here, as was mentioned in the opening comments, NATO continues to expand its reach. Cold War against China is escalating. Cuba remains unjustly burdened under heavy U.S. economic war and sanctions. AFRICOM continues its expansion. Zionist colonization of occupied Palestine continues. Propaganda wars confusing the general public continue. aliens and submarines have more coverage than the corrupt and repressive structure of the United States. And these geopolitical realities demand that we, as representatives of the international working class, respond with unity, strategy, and determination. And as the conference introductory video suggested, the current tasks before the international working class are of extreme historical significance. As we see this unipolar world order shift, it set off alarm bells amongst the ruling class, and this is prompting desperate measures to retain their power and influence. It's becoming increasingly clear that the struggle for socialism and true democracy within the United States is intrinsically tied to the global struggle against imperialism. So worker organization and cross-organizational collaboration are the cornerstones of our collective strength, and we must join forces transcending borders and ideologies to resist the encroachment of these imperialist forces seeking to exert control over us, as well as sovereign nations perpetuating unjust practices here domestically as well. So this is why NNOC's June 25th actions, we witnessed collaboration between the Palestinian Youth Movement, Nodotol, CPUSA, DSA, the African People's Socialist Party, the African People's Revolutionary Party, student organizing groups, liberation theologists, Colombian, Peruvian, Venezuelan solidarity activists, Korean reunification activists, those struggling for the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. So because of this heightened political repression we're seeing, even here in Charleston, $2 million were just allocated for 745 cameras versus using it to better infrastructure for the people. We're seeing attacks on education, attacks on genderqueer and non-conforming folks, attacks on our livelihood, just attacks on our ability to simply survive. And in the words of Subcomandante Zapatista, another world is possible, but only on the corpse of capitalism. So I'll share an example of this advocacy, this collaborative work, by showcasing the efficacy of NNOC's recent Off the List campaign, which is a 4-stage campaign designed to promote political education, local and national actions, as well as to help drive awareness about Cuba's designation on the state sponsors of terrorism list. So for those of you that don't know, the state sponsors of terrorism list is a list that is maintained and created only by the United States, the biggest state sponsor of terror in the world. And this designation exacerbates the already destructive impacts of a 60-year illegal blockade, economic war against Cuba. So in addition to not being able to trade with some certain countries, people can't send remittances to their families. There are restrictions on entering the US for those that have traveled to Cuba. Universities are barred from supporting collaborative research with Cuba. And more recently, the Biden administration has designated Cuba's medical internationalism as human trafficking. So you can see on the screen kind of a history of the designation as a state sponsor of terror, and there's no evidence of Cuba being a state sponsor of terror. And on the contrary, we see that Cuba is a state sponsor of peace with the amount of work that they have done to support people globally from a medical standpoint. There are a lot of words on this screen right now, but whatever line you read, it will be clear and evident that the US people want to normalize relations with Cuba. So from labor unions to city councils to legal groups in the United States to member states of Latin American and Caribbean solidarity networks, people want normalized relations with Cuba. And you can see there's just an intense propaganda war that is going on right now and has been for several decades. That really misguides the US people about what Cuba is really actually doing. So the National Network on Cuba launched the Off the List campaign back in March of this year. And it started with political education and outreach, really building a toolkit that allowed our member organizations, as well as those that were supportive of Cuban sovereignty, to participate in these efforts. And we most recently had a large international protest effort as part of this campaign. So you can see marked on this very amazing map the different areas that were engaged in that struggle with us. We also have this photo collage of, so you can see the impact and the significance of the amount of people that were able to come out and support these efforts in DC, but also around the nation. So in addition to having advocacy days to support congressional lobbying, there were direct action in so many different organizations. You can see some of our sponsors and collaborators here. but we ended up having over 150 endorsements for the campaign, 600 plus protesters in DC, 93 plus resolutions passed in the United States, 50 plus solidarity actions globally, and 3 arrests for peaceful actions. And luckily, the charges against the NNOC3 were dropped, but I think the fact that they were even charged in the first place just shows kind of where we are with repression in the United States. As we are in the throes of this campaign, we're seeing increased worker solidarity with Cuba from inside the United States, but we're also seeing workers all over the nation really striking at this point, preparing to strike, engaging in struggle. And that shows kind of where we are from a standpoint of educating people about their rights and workers recognizing the power that they have. And so it's important for us to engage these workers and loop them into the Cuba Solidarity Network and movement so that they can see how well their struggles align with that of the Cuban people and how well collaboration will really lead to liberation for us all. So there's several ways that you can get involved in this campaign and learn more about it. There is a toolkit available, and inside that toolkit, you have so many different resources, from resources on passing resolutions, what that looks like, getting social media the word out on social media, sharing your own campaign information with us. And it's an ongoing effort. It's an ongoing effort. And I believe that we need to continue to have this collaborative work and position ourselves as ones that are able to engage new people, whether that's student groups, whether that's partner fraternal organizations. We need to really dive deep into how we can spread knowledge and dive deep into structuring new ways to politically educate and engage people and loop them into our overall movements. So from an NNOC standpoint, there will be a reading group meeting August 2nd. They'll be reading History Will Absolve Me by Fidel. There's an upcoming fundraiser with Right Brain TV that you can participate in. Also, save the date for the NNOC Fall Conference in person at UMass Boston, October 13th through 15th. And we have more information coming soon on different ways that you can get involved. Particularly, we're seeing a large number of new engagements on social media and our digital advocacy efforts. So if you want to get involved or do collaborative things within your own organization or party, feel free to join us in these efforts. So I want to close by saying that we are the agents of victory, and we must break free from our collective colonial chains. We're viewed only as pieces of capital, and our spirits are constantly ravaged for the almighty dollar. So the crushing weight of capitalism has trickled down into the fabric of our existence, and community cannot be built where it doesn't exist. So collaboration and care are necessary as we escape from this illegitimately constructed reality. So we have a responsibility to challenge the unjust actions by the United States and the policies perpetuated by imperialist forces in general. We must continue to promote dialogue, cooperation, and understanding among nations and peoples, and build bridges of solidarity to counteract the divisive tactics employed by those who seek to maintain dominance. So as we continue to share our experiences in this space, in this forum, let us remember that the challenges we face are not isolated or confined to one region alone. They're interconnected and require a united response from all of us who stand for justice and human dignity. So let's replace imperialist aggression with genuine cooperation, mutual respect, and the pursuit of common prosperity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Shaquille. We will now be accepting questions from our audience for the keynote speaker. So I'm going to start with one that was already submitted through the chat. And the question is, how can we work with the broad left in the US for Cuba solidarity?
So for me, particularly coming out of the June 25th actions, I think it's important to look at organizations that might align from many different standpoints. So we look to Cuba as a model for medical internationalism, educational support networks. I think the easiest way to get new leftist organizations that may not necessarily be in the Cuba Solidarity movement involved is to, one, make sure that they go to Cuba, and two, to think about the different areas that they align. So I've had a lot of success talking with university officials that want to do research in collaboration with the Cuban people, but also building relationships with those on the ground in Cuba. They are able to often articulate their needs and their struggles a lot better than we can. And it's our job to amplify and articulate ways that people in the US can get involved. So from a generalist standpoint, that's where the educational piece comes into play. So whether that's sharing documentaries, sharing resources, using resources that are developed in this toolkit, identifying those gaps where knowledge is missing, it's important for us to communicate that with one another so that we can have a broader approach to spreading knowledge about what Cuba has done for people internationally.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Definitely important to remember that people don't have to be revolutionaries yet in order to oppose the blockade. So we have two more questions from the chat that we're going to ask. Our next one is, how did Cuba get put on the SSOT list to begin with? Can someone unmute Shaquille? Thank you.
Perfect. Sorry, y'all couldn't unmute. So Cuba was added to the SSOT list in 1982 by Reagan. And again, there's no evidence that Cuba is a state sponsor of terror. It was just an extension of the hatred for Cuba's liberation movements. Cuba was removed from the list in 2015 by Barack Obama, but then added back in 2021 by Donald Trump. So Cuba's designation hasn't been shifted by Biden, although the administration agreed to start looking at ways to discuss removal of Cuba from the list. So it's been a long-standing designation that has zero evidence. And you can find the US's narrative on the US State Department site, but there are a lot of resources available on NNOC, as well as partner organizations that really explain why Cuba is not a state sponsor of terror, but is a state sponsor of peace.
Great, thank you. And our final question from the chat, I'm a big fan of this question. Someone asked, how can someone donate to the NNOC?
Thank you for asking. So our fiscal sponsor is the Alliance for Global Justice, and we have a profile on the website where you can donate to National Network on Cuba. You can also cut us a check and write it to National Network on Cuba. We also have several fundraising efforts and different initiatives coming up with our partner organizations. So if you visit nnOC.org and make sure you fill out our contact form, we'll keep you in the loop on new ways to support us and get involved in Cuba solidarity work.
Great. Thank you so much again, Shaquille, for your presentation. And now we are going to give the floor to the Philippine Communist Party's National Youth Division, who've prepared a video for this conference presented by Comrade Domingo Castro Tina Jr.
Pag-ibig ba ang hihigit kaya sa pagkadalisay at pagkadakila gaya ng pag-ibig sa tinubuang lupa? Aling pag-ibig ba wala nang wala, walang mahalagang hindi inihandog ng may pusong wagas sa bayang nagkupo pagkatiis at pagod, buhay mayabuting magkalagot-lagot. Ang nakaraan, panahon ng alim, ang inaasahan, araw na darating ng pagkatimawa ng mga alipin, liban pa sa bayan, saan tatanghali. Kayong nalagasan ng bunga't bulaklak, kahoy niya ring buhay na nilantat sukat ng balabalakid, makapal na hirap muling manariwat, sabay ay lumiyag, ipagkahandog-handog ang buong pag-ibig hanggang sa may dugot, ubusing itigis kung sa pagtatanggol buhay ang kapalit.
Jump! Jump! Edka! Edka! Jump! 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 Edka! Jump! 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 Edka! Edka! Jump! Jump! Jump!
To the Young Communist League of Communist Party of USA, International Department and Peace and Solidarity Commission. Dear comrades, our warmest revolutionary greetings. We wholeheartedly congratulate you and your party's celebration. We salute your unwavering commitment to Marxism-Leninism as your party's ideological, theoretical, political, and practical foundation. Today, the world imperialism crisis and fascism are driving the whole world to unite, to form a concrete global action which is founded on the class ideologies of Marxism-Leninism, and there is no alternative against the threat of war and global catastrophe. We have to strengthen our international unity and cooperation. It is imperative and the only alternative. The capitalist war being waged by the imperialists against the working people of the world had led to an unprecedented global economic crisis that reawakened the fascist ideology of Nazism. We believe that this celebration will enhance our party's capacity and capabilities to lead the working class against imperialism, against war, for peace, democracy, and socialism. Long live the Young Communist League and Communist Party USA. Long live proletarian internationalism. Formally yours, Domingo Tiña Jr., Chairman of National Youth Division PKP 1930.
Thank you, comrades, for that heartwarming message. We will now give the floor to Comrade Eduardo Landean, General Secretary of the Philippine Communist Party.
Comrade Alvaro Rodriguez, International Secretary, Communist Party of the United States of America, the leadership and members of the CPUSA, the delegate in attendance to this conference. Let me extend to you our party, Partido Komunista ng Pilipinas, PKP 1930, our warmest comradely greeting and gratitude to the International Department for initiating this fraternal conference for global action against war, for peace and democracy. It is indeed a must as the growing international situation is exacerbating to global war and conflict. Current imperialist provocations, the NATO and the USA nurturing of the fascist neo-Nazis ideology is now diabolically burning Ukraine and is causing the division and the crisis in Europe and in the world. The same tragic development in the event had led to the Second World War. It is now in Europe and it's expanding in our region, the Asia Pacific. USA and the European imperialism is flexing its muscle wars. It is designed to be a proxy war that our country and neighboring Asian nation will be designed battlefront and will therefore be the resources to feed the greedy meat grinder of the imperialist war. This had happened to us during the USA and imperialist war in Asia, in Korea, in Vietnam. In pursuit of this odious intent, recently the United States has induced our present government to provide sites and location for 4 additional bases besides the previous 10. Thus, our country looks like to be the military barracks of the United States as it is. Strategically located from the north to the south of our archipelago. While our leaders are pronouncing that it's for our national protection against calamities and foreign invasion, but a close look and scrutiny at this location. It is complementary designed to serve USA and its allies' strategic military interests. The complement of USA 130 bases in Asia and the Pacific region aim against China, North Korea, and Russia. This is alarming. It's designed for Armageddon. We need global united action, an action with the aim and purpose which will lead us to curb and eventually prevent the imperialist war of fascism, a common and a united struggle for peace and change in the global order, reminding us of the united front against fascism called prior to the Second World War. Done by our communist forefather, we had caused the defeat of fascism and militarism. The same is what we need today. Our parties, in response to this call, is actively campaigning for the dismantling of the bases as our domestic action. This campaign is militantly designed for the calling of the national movement for peace and against war, and for the declaration of our country as zone of peace and neutrality. Embodied in this call is the dismantling of foreign military bases. We believe that we cannot win nor our resolute action will enter this imperialist design. It is not enough. We need and must join together in this global call. Our party is very enthusiastic that you hold this conference for the international action. I think this is a must. Comrade, I'm speaking to you with the memory of our party in your party, which we consider not only our fraternal party, but also our fraternal brother. We are grateful and we cherish our party's formative years and growth was accomplished with the fraternal support of your party. Today, I am speaking in our office, William Pomeroy Hall. It is a conference room of our office, which we name after former member of your party, which was married to one of our leaders, Celia Mariano. Their assets are here with us. And at my back is the gallery of our leaders and heroes. Comrade Vicente Laba, which was trained by CPUSA, has become the General Secretary of our party during the Passes War. I wish I had more time to talk with you, but we have many other speakers. Thus, I will bid my best wishes to you. Kindly have a look at the video we have sent with this conference. These are our temporary activities. Thank you. Long live internationalism, long live democracy, and long live socialism. Thank you very much, comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Landeon. We will now give the floor to Carlos Martinez, representing Friends of Socialist China. Carlos just published a fantastic new book, The East is Still Red, Chinese Socialism in the 21st Century. We are happy to present such an accomplished advocate for peace and against the Cold War 2.0. Carlos Martinez, you have the floor.
Greetings on behalf of Friends of Socialist China to the CPUSA International Conference 2023. It's an honor to be invited to participate in this event to join you in struggle against an imperialist system that's destroying the planet while spreading war, chaos, poverty, inequality, and misery. As you know well, the United States is leading a multifaceted campaign of containing and encircling China. This escalating Cold War has multiple components: sanctions, a trade war, a propaganda war, the undermining of the One China policy, the arming of Taiwan province, so-called freedom of navigation assertions in the South China Sea, the formation of AUKUS, a trilateral nuclear pact with Australia and Britain, which is in clear violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the encouraging of Japanese rearmament, the attempt to stop China developing advanced semiconductor technology, the attacks on Huawei and TikTok. The list goes on. It's a Cold War in the sense that it doesn't currently involve direct military engagement between the main protagonists, but that may well not permanently be the case, given the levels of recklessness and stupidity prevailing in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere in the imperialist camp. What's the purpose of this new Cold War? It's not only about suppressing China or rolling back the Chinese Revolution. Just as the original Cold War was fought not exclusively against the Soviet Union, but against the very notion that the nations of the world could exercise sovereignty and independence, so is this second Cold War about preventing humanity's trajectory towards a multipolar system of international relations, about preserving, defending, and consolidating US hegemony, or as Truman called it, a world environment in which the American system can flourish. China's the primary target because it's become a major power, because it's become the economic center of gravity for the global south, because it's become a science and technology powerhouse, because its people live increasingly well, because its extraordinary successes in tackling poverty, improving its people's living standards, developing green energy systems, fighting the pandemic and more provide material proof that Francis Fukuyama's end of history was a mirage, that neoliberal capitalism is not the final stage of human development. There's a great deal at stake in today's epic struggle between the forces of imperialism and the forces of multipolarity and socialism. Humanity is facing unprecedented crises, some of them existential. If we fail to pool our resources and cooperate in a serious and systematic way, we run the risk of Earth, our only home, becoming uninhabitable within the space of a few generations. Meanwhile, we've just been taught a horrifying lesson about how vulnerable we all are to pandemics. And don't forget that human activity in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, factory farming and destruction of natural habitats is making pandemics ever more likely. Antimicrobial resistance threatens to turn back decades of medical advances. The spectre of nuclear war is ever present. All these problems demand the most profound and urgent global cooperation. Socialists, communists, and anti-war activists in the West have a responsibility to educate and organize around these issues. The project for a new American century and the survival of our species are mutually exclusive propositions. The struggle against imperialism, against hegemony, and against Cold War is not a nice to have for our movement. It's an indispensable component of our work, of our struggle for socialism and a brighter future for humanity. Communists and other progressive people in the United States have a long, honourable, and often courageous record of solidarity with the Chinese Revolution. Chinese communists and progressives, in turn, have also stood in solidarity with the communists, workers, and oppressed peoples in the US. In the late 1930s, your party joined with the Communist Party of Canada to send Dr. Norman Bethune to the front line in China, where he became the embodiment of internationalism for generation after generation of Chinese people in their hundreds of millions. On July 29, 1945, Comrade Mao Zedong sent a telegram to Comrade William Z. Foster hailing the revival of the CPUSA. Today, your party carries forward and develops that fine tradition in the new era, and it is in this context and in this spirit that we're proud to join with you in common struggle and look forward to developing our close and friendly cooperation. Thank you again for your invitation. We wish your conference every success.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. We will now give the floor to Comrade Zhang Shui-Qin, member of the Central Committee and professor at the Party School of the Communist Party of China.
Dear comrades, It's my honor to address this second international conference hosted by the Communist Party USA. The Communist Party of China has taken a remarkable journey since its founding a century ago. Through the continued efforts of the whole party and the entire nation, China has realized the first centenary goal, building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. This means that we have brought about a historical resolution to the problem of absolute poverty in China, and we are now marching in confident strides toward the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects. Our party has dedicated itself to achieving lasting greatness for the Chinese nation and committed itself to the noble cause of peace and development for humanity. Our responsibility is unmatched in importance, and our mission is glorious beyond compare. Marxism is the fundamental guiding ideology upon which our party and our country are founded and thrive. Our experience has taught us that at the fundamental level, we owe the success of our party and socialism with Chinese characteristics to the fact that Marxism works, particularly when it is adapted to the Chinese context and the needs of our time. The sound theoretical guidance of Marxism is the source from which our party draws its firm belief and conviction, and which enables our party to seize the historical initiative. Chinese communists are keenly aware that only by integrating the basic tenets of Marxism with China's specific reality and their fan traditional culture, and only by applying dialectical and historical materialism can we provide correct answers to the major questions presented by the time and discovered through practice, and can we ensure that Marxism always retains its vigor and vitality. The central task of the Communist Party of China will be to lead the Chinese people of all ethnic groups in a concerted effort to realize the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects, and to advance the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. Today, our world, our time, and history are changing in ways like never before. The historical trends of peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit are unstoppable. The will of the people and the general trends of our day will eventually lead to a bright future for humanity. And yet, the hegemonic, high-handed, and bullying acts of using strength to intimidate the weak, taking from others by force and subterfuge, and playing zero-sum games are exerting grave harm. The deficit in peace, development, security, and governance is growing. All of this is posing unprecedented challenges for human society. The world has once again reached a crossroads in history, and its future course will be decided by all the world's peoples. China has always been committed to its foreign policy goal of upholding world peace and promoting common development. And it is dedicated to promoting a human community with a shared future. To conclude, I wish this international conference a full success. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Zhang Shui-Qin. Next up is a panel discussion on the issue of the US-led Cold War 2.0 against China and the associated trilateral military pact known as AUKUS. Please remember to submit your questions for this panel to the Q&A box in Zoom. The Communist Party USA unequivocally condemns AUKUS, the trilateral military pact aimed at threatening, suppressing, and containing the People's Republic of China. AUKUS is a response to changes in the global economy which are promoting a direct challenge to neoliberal norms of government across the globe. The US is determined to maintain its political and economic hegemony in the economically expanding Asia-Pacific region. In the face of declining US economic power, AUKUS aims to tie Australia even more tightly to US imperialism's plans to contain and control the People's Republic of China and to consolidate Australia as a US launching pad for coercion and even war. Cold War 2.0 has been initiated by the US with a lot of euphemisms: a free, open, rules-based order, democracy versus authoritarianism, strategic competition, defense of a US-led liberal international order, etc., to obfuscate the real purpose of all of these efforts, to reverse the decline of US imperialism through force and economic war, a very dangerous proposition. What is needed above all in the world today is cooperation among all nations to address existential threats to humanity and indeed life on Earth. What is needed now is for all nations to abide by the UN Charter, to join the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, to honor other nuclear weapons treaties, and to pivot national budgets to dismantling and eliminating nuclear weapons. What is needed above all is immediate action to prevent tectonic environmental shifts. All nations must act together to prevent the observable climate calamities from getting far worse, and to seek out solutions to material energy needs that benefit all humankind while protecting the health of the planet. What is needed now is global collaboration to significantly reduce the pandemic through immediate universal access to vaccines and medicines. Making the world safe and humanity healthy should top the priority list of all nations. In particular, the two countries with the biggest economies and biggest impact on Earth, the United States and China, along with their partners and allies, have the responsibility to cooperate to these ends. First up, we will give the floor to Comrade Ellie Holm, Assistant General Secretary of the Communist Party of Australia. Comrade Holm, the floor is yours.
Dear comrades, on behalf of the Communist Party of Australia, I thank the CPUSA for inviting us to speak, and I send our fraternal greetings and solidarity to all your members and supporters. I acknowledge that I speak from the stolen lands of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the traditional owners of the Australian continent. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, sky, and water. It always was, and it always will be Aboriginal land. US imperialism is setting up a dangerous plan to encircle and contain socialist China. Alliances have been formed, such as the Quad, Five Eyes, and AUKUS. The AUKUS agreement between the US, UK, and Australia was signed with bipartisan support in 2021 and endorsed by the new Labor Albanese government in office since May 2022. The US has long been militarising the north of Australia as a potential site to threaten China. This has been accelerated by AUKUS to include US nuclear-armed submarines being based in Australia, as well as additional forces and weaponry. The old colonial approach of terra nullius is again in play. There is little to no consultation with the Australian people, and in particular with remote communities in Northern Australia, that will become the front line of Australia in an offensive war in the Asia Pacific. Space company Equatorial Launch Australia has signed an agreement with United States rocket company Phantom Space Corporation to collaborate on missions at the Arnhem Space Centre in the Northern Territory. Phantom has confirmed it has had links to the US Department of Defence. It has hopes to mass produce rockets and fire orbital rockets from the Northeast Arnhem Land site by 2025. This is causing alarm in local communities. Elder and Arnhem Land politician Yinguru Goyala said consultation with local constituents was needed if the space station was to be used for military purposes, such as for a missile range. I have not been consulted about orbital rockets and missiles being launched from our country, and it's very concerning that these things are being talked about by ELA and others without the Yolngu clans connected to the Gove Peninsula being at the forefront of the conversation. Yingya said, our country is seen as expendable because we are in the middle of nowhere, but we're not in the middle of nowhere. The rockets are launching, flying over and coming down on country that is populated, from bigger towns to homeland towns to hunting grounds and ceremonial sites. The US is intent on constructing an overwhelming military presence in both the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Most of Southeast Asia have expressed misgivings about AUKUS, reinforced by NATO's characterization of AUKUS as a key instrument for NATO Asia-Pacific involvement. This presence involves the modernization and expansion of America's military alliances with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, and Australia. Upgraded security arrangements with Taiwan, Singapore, New Zealand, and Pakistan, and efforts to build closer ties with India. Australia is set to become a willing proxy for NATO, which looks to exert its power and influence in the Asia-Pacific. France, UK, Germany, and Canada will join the biannual Talisman Sabre War Games organised by the US and Australia, which started in Australia on July 22nd for 2 weeks. Australia must withdraw from the partnership with nuclear-armed NATO and its aggressive war plans, and NATO must be kept out of the Asia-Pacific. The real threat to Australian security is from the US war machine, which is targeting the People's Republic of China. Neither Australia nor the US can win a war against China. The only winner is the military-industrial complex. In highly significant move, India has withdrawn from the Talisman Sabre War Games. Ms. Annette Brownlee, a spokesperson for the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, said that the United States and Australian government hopes that India joining the Quad and making it a military alliance have been dashed by India's withdrawal from the Talisman Sabre War Games. In Australia, the failure of mass mobilisation to stop Australia joining the US in the invasion of Iraq saw the peace movement greatly diminished. Small groups remain focusing on aspects of peace, but there was no network to bring those groups together in a mass movement. Since the announcement of AUKUS, the party joined others to set up anti-AUKUS groups. It looks increasingly promising that the anti-AUKUS movement will develop into the strong organised movement that is essential. The Communist Party of Australia has called for the adoption of a peace budget, a budget that will create many more jobs and far greater security for the Australian people through much needed spending on housing, education, medical care, and action on climate change. It is working class taxes that pay for the weapons, the working class who fight their wars, and the working class who are abandoned by the government when they develop post-traumatic stress disorder from fighting those wars. A 2021 Defence Department report put suicides at 24% higher for ex-serving males and 102% higher for ex-serving females when compared with the Australian population. The only beneficiaries of the preparation and execution of war are weapons dealers, the war profiteers who sell the guns, bombs, subs, tanks, missiles, drones, and more. Without war, they are nothing. Submarines have started to appear secretly in our ports. These ports are in close proximity to residential communities, but knowledge of their activity is not well known. Proposed permanent sites for submarine rotations have been identified in Cockburn Sound in Western Australia and Port Kembla in New South Wales. The people, including the Maritime Union, have mobilised to deliver strong resistance in Port Kembla, but not so much in Western Australia and South Australia, where the promise of jobs that won't be realised is used to subdue workers and their unions. Dollar for dollar military spending creates far fewer jobs than spending on other sectors like education and healthcare. Military spending creates jobs that bring wealth to some people and businesses, but does nothing to alleviate poverty or result in widely shared prosperity. Prime Minister Albanese has boasted of what he calls new jobs, new industries, and new expertise in science, technology, and cyber. But this is all for war, for death and destruction. Awareness is being raised among trade union members and their trade unions that the job story is a hoax. Unions must join the movement against this anti-working class military adventure. We applaud the blow delivered by the Electrical Trades Union when a motion against AUKUS put to the Australian Labor Party conference got support from the rank and file. There is hope that unions such as the Maritime Union of Australia and the Electrical Trade Union will present challenges at the National Conference of the Labor Party next month. Psychological warfare is being waged against the Australian people, and enabling media who, as we've seen with its view on climate change, runs a consistent editorial line on AUKUS, and critical voices are rarely heard. A sinister socialisation and militarisation process is underway to persuade Australian school children about the merits of AUKUS. Weapons companies are sponsoring and directly delivering science, technology, engineering and maths education programs to primary school children with the explicit intention of creating positive attitudes to careers in weapons development and production. Research by the Medical Association for the Prevention of War shows major weapons companies seek to attract the best and brightest young people into a comprehensive talent pipeline, socialised to accept the development and deployment of war hardware and software as an essential, exciting and rewarding career. Children should not be the vehicle to deliver the militarisation of our society, entrenching the belief that our political, ideological, economic and social issues can and should be resolved with military solutions. Where is the funding for career training and pathways for skills to tackle our greatest threats, such as homelessness, lack of medical care and the environmental crises? Where is the funding for skills in areas such as renewable energy, water and food security or public health? There is no such equivalent funding. War and its preparations are the greatest threat to the environment. How do these politicians, military academics and media criminals intend to save Australia from environmental catastrophe? Where is the funding for the 500,000 Australians who are struggling to afford food every day? What is occurring is theft of the public purse that's being funneled to UK and US nuclear submarine industries. Generations of the working class will face austerity to pay for it, so that Australian armed forces can effectively be turned into a branch of another country's military. There is no choice but to take it to the streets. Climate activists, nuclear-free activists and peace activists are realising their common interests and working together with left and progressive parties, some trade unions, churches and community groups. We know war and climate change are the greatest threats to our security. China is not. We can all agree on one thing, and that is China is not planning to invade Australia. With organisation, our voices will be magnified with the rallying cry that the proliferation of weapons is one of the greatest threats to peace in today's world. The global weapons industry profits from war and insecurity and is associated with corruption and human rights violations. Imperialist wars will not end until capitalism is overthrown. We know the declining imperial empire will aggressively and viciously struggle to retain its domination. The losers will be mankind and the planet. We can only confront this on a global scale. We must fight to replace capitalism by socialism. Our comrade Dr. Hannah Middleton recently wrote, "It is time for us to join together and call on governments around the world to cut military spending and to instead invest in the true needs of the people and the planet to build a just and sustainable peace." The Communist Party of Australia is committed to defeating AUKUS and getting Australians the peace budget they need. We commit to organising locally and in a unified front globally for the better world we know is possible. Thank you for your invitation and best wishes with this important conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Holm. Next, we will give the floor to Dr. Jenny Clegg, an accomplished advocate for peace and the author of China's Global Strategy Towards a Multipolar World. Dr. Clegg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Manchester, England. Many thanks for this great opportunity to speak. I hope I won't repeat too much of what's already been said by the great speakers before me. Xi Jinping, in his speech to the 2017 Party Congress, declared, "The world is undergoing profound changes unseen in a century." It's only now, 5 or 6 years later, as we see the dangerous deterioration in US-China relations, that we can begin to register the significance of these words. Following Obama's pivot to Asia, Trump's success was to persuade the US establishment that China was the main threat. His new Cold War is now being pursued with even greater tenacity by Biden. The militarization of the Pacific over the last 2 years has been breathtaking. US bases are being upgraded in Guam, Okinawa, the Marianas, and new ones are being built, for example, in Australia for AUKUS, in preparation for delivering forward deployed precision strike missiles. New Japanese island bases and new access agreement with the Philippines allow the US to plug the gaps along the first island chain, blocking China's coast from north to south and tightening the grip around Taiwan. And for the first time in 40 years, US nuclear submarines are appearing in South Korea. Unlike Trump, Biden has realized that the US cannot contain China on its own. It needs allies. And the Ukraine war has served as a pretext here to bring allies into line under the crazy logic that because Russia invaded Ukraine, China is bound to invade Taiwan. The Pacific security frame is being restructured to integrate allies according to US priorities into its operational systems. Through the Indo-Pacific Quad, Australia, Japan, US, and India, through AUKUS, which was finalized in San Diego in March, and with NATO's outreach into Asia. Then there's the burgeoning US, Japan, South Korea alliance. And this year, as has been mentioned, the US has elevated Japan into a military power in its own right, and the doubling of its military spending in 5 years is eye-watering, as is the cost of AUKUS for Australia. One figure mentioned has been $368 billion. Obama was focused on the South China Sea. Biden is now dragging Taiwan into the picture, increasing arms sales to the island and dispatching hundreds of military trainers, just like in Ukraine after 2014, all in preparation for war. With naval vessels swirling about the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, it's like a tinderbox. Add to this Pelosi's provocative visit to Taiwan last August, Biden's repeated destabilizing remarks about the US defending the island, and then the balloon incident, which saw the US completely lose the plot. And we can see how easily tensions could spiral out of control. Of course, the potential for conflict has been baked in since the US declared the Pacific our lake after World War II, leaving Korea stuck in an armistice, while strategic ambiguity over Taiwan blocks reunification with China. Now, just to turn to China, Xi Jinping was determined to avoid falling into what the World Bank predicted, which was a middle income trap, in which wages are rising so that the competitive edge would be lost. And yet the country remains dependent on advanced economies' core technologies, unable to move up and down, as has occurred in much of Latin America. Xi Jinping in 2015 advanced the Made in China 2025 initiative, promoting innovation at the cutting edge of technology. And today, although China falls short in some key areas such as semiconductors, a recent report from a Western source has China leading in 37 out of 44 high-impact emerging technology domains. US hegemonism ultimately depends on beating China for control of the technological frontier. On the one hand, by cutting off access to advanced technologies, the US aims to keep China locked into the middle income trap and induce a collapse. On the other hand, it uses militarization as a means of monopolizing the digital economy. Through its upgraded alliances, the US looks to create captive markets around its advanced components, especially in the military industries and big tech, in order to fix the technological race in its favor. Take AUKUS, which is not only about the UK and the US equipping Australia with nuclear-powered submarines, but also covers advanced cyber mechanisms, AI, and quantum technologies, as well as hypersonic warfare and information sharing. And now we have NATO's upgraded individually tailored partnerships with Japan, Australia, South Korea, and New Zealand, covering space, cybersecurity, and emerging technology programs. And the Ukraine war, of course, is being used as a proving ground, not only for new systems of automated weaponry, surveillance, and data crunching, but also in ways of coordinating allies in logistics, the supply of weapons and ammunition, and imposing sanctions. Over the next 26 years, we will see China diffusing a distinctive modernization throughout the country. Unlike the Western path, China aims for a more inclusive, fairer, and greener modernization. Internally, a path to common prosperity, lifting the majority of those on lower incomes up to the middle in an olive-shaped society, and externally, rather than draining the resources of other countries, forging mutually beneficial economic exchanges. China's share of world GDP has risen in the last 20 years from 7% to 19%. Now the BRICS are starting to inch ahead, comprising 40% of the world's population. In the next 7 years, this group will likely account for around 50% of world GDP, whilst the G7, 10% of the world population, will decline below 30%. This is the new reality facing the world, an objective reality driving multipolarity. At the subjective level, the tipping point in multipolarity came when successively Latin American, Southeast Asian, and Middle Eastern countries declined Biden's personal request to supply arms to Ukraine, and along with much of Africa, refused to take sides in the war. At the crest of the multipolar upsurge, we see China unfolding a series of initiatives, essentially an anti-imperialist agenda. The Global Development Initiative promoting the right to development, and the Global Security Initiative, which guided China's proposal on the political solution to the Ukraine crisis, as well as facilitating the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal. This initiative aims to promote common security for all, not security for some against others, the NATO rationale. A third initiative on global civilization looks to mutual learning as a way of managing disputes given differences in culture, values, and ways of doing in a diverse multipolar world. These initiatives, what Xi Jinping calls a new type of international relations, are designed to advance the UN Charter. The US elites have convinced themselves that China is intent on becoming the next world hegemon, pushing it aside, when in fact China's aim for higher quality growth is just a natural part of development. And after a century of humiliation, it wants to claim its rightful place in the world. The challenges for China are immense. The role of the Chinese Communist Party is crucial. It is the key link in China's particular balancing of centralization and decentralization, enabling a whole society approach, mobilizing cadres and government officials, rural and urban populations, and public and private sectors around social and national goals, be it the eradication of extreme poverty or those of innovation and common prosperity. Goal setting, planning, putting politics in command, involves the application of Marxist methods of historical and dialectical materialism. It enables the CPC to signal the way forward, the direction for people to take towards improving their livelihood step by step, in line with the particular circumstances and level of development. China's advance is taking place amidst parallel transitions to a green future, to digitization, and to the increasing voice of developing countries in global rulemaking. And China is taking initiatives on all these fronts to shape the international agenda. Right now, all these transitions are being snarled up as the US wrestles against the multipolar trend. The problem is the US refusal or inability to share power because of its perception of its own exceptionalism. Some allies in Europe are becoming hesitant, worried about where things are heading. Eye-watering military budgets are coming under public pressure. Yet the US remains absolutely intent on a new Cold War bloc confrontation, relentlessly wearing away at resistance to piece together an Atlantic-Pacific partnership. Has the US got it in it to adapt to a changed world? Will it eventually relinquish hegemonism, or will self-delusion or failure, political and economic, cause it eventually to force a war? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clegg and Comrade Holm. We are now going to be accepting questions from our audience. Please submit your questions to the Q&A box on Zoom. And I'm going to start with one of our first questions that was submitted, which asks, what impact does China's example of South-South cooperation, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, have on US imperialism? And I think either of our speakers can jump in and offer your thoughts to any of these questions.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? My screen disappeared and I was just fixing that.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So the question was, what impact does China's example of South-South cooperation, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, have on US imperialism?
Yes, I can take that. Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's actually coming up to the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's gone through various stages of development. Essentially, to use the Deng Xiaoping a characterization of trying to cross a river by feeling for the stones under the water, China has been very much feeling its way, reaching out with the Belt and Road, trying to find a completely different way of building relations with countries around the world. The Belt and Road Initiative has seen a lot of infrastructure projects being built, particularly in developing countries, joining up developing countries, and loans have been given on an unconditional basis. This has been welcomed by developing countries, very different from the conditions applied by the IMF, the imperialist conditions. I mentioned the Global Development Initiative in my talk, and essentially the Global Development Initiative is building up from the Belt and Road and from the practices of the Belt and Road, and China and those participants in the Belt and Road will be drawing lessons about the kinds of rules and practices around the right to development, which can be taken forward. So in other words, when the United States talks about a rules-based order, this is of course the order that has served the United States and imperialism, rules that have been set on its own terms, as I just mentioned, the rules of the IMF. Through the Belt and Road and through the Global Development Initiative, new rules will be brought forward into the international sphere. I would, of course, note that the Ukraine war, in many ways, has been intended to disrupt the Belt and Road. Ukraine was, of course, China was the biggest trading partner for Ukraine, and Ukraine was joining the Belt and Road at the northernmost end. And China's aim of bringing Eurasia together, bringing Asia and Europe together across land and also linked by sea, was really an escape from US hegemony. And so, of course, the US has been concerned through the Ukraine war to draw European allies closer to the US across the Atlantic, away from the Eurasian link.
Great, thank you so much. We have 2 more questions, which I'm going to ask at the same time, and then either of you can feel free to jump in and answer them. The first question is, what is the condition of the peace movement in Australia? And then the second question is, how can peace activists from the US, Australia, and Britain come together to defeat AUKUS?
Yeah, as I said earlier, the peace movement in Australia really almost disappeared after Iraq. People were so demoralised, really, when they came out en masse, to be ignored by the government and for Australia to follow the US into that war. So we're really at the stages at the moment where we're just rebuilding that movement. But there is really promising signs that it will continue to grow. It started, of course, with older people who had the previous experience of the Vietnam War and those wars when they were younger, who had already sort of been involved in that sort of activism, starting things off. But we're now being joined with students from the universities, and the universities have a very good reason to get involved, because their campuses are being turned into a provider of military talent, if you like. So those 2 groups coming together, the big move is going to be to try and draw the unions into it much more. And once the unions come in, there will be an even greater movement. But at the moment, there is this promise of jobs that keeps being reiterated by the government. And unions don't want to be seen to move against jobs. So that's a hurdle that has to be overcome. But I think that will be overcome. And I have every hope that this movement will continue to grow the way it shows signs of developing. And our international connections are going to be incredibly important. There is already people looking to the US and the UK and forming those sort of connections and networks. And hopefully that just further develops as well. And these conferences such as these really help to develop those connections.
Shall I come in on the other question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. I think Britain is playing an instrumental role in linking Europe and the Asia Pacific in ways that people really don't know very much about, because it's so hard to raise the question of military spending and the Ukraine war and NATO. There's a complete block in our media on talking about these things. Our Tory government a couple of years ago declared Global Britain and sent the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier off to the South China Sea. And since then, we've been getting more and more deeply involved, not only through AUKUS, but also with new military ties with Japan, in which Britain could actually be involved with fighting with Japan over disputed islands with China. I mean, this is this is really not common knowledge. There's been no democratic discussion about this particular turn in British foreign policy. I'm very interested to hear what Ellie says, because I think that the organisation opposition in Australia is more advanced than in the UK, where we also have a problem of the trade unions being drawn in with the promise of thousands and thousands and thousands of highly skilled jobs. We've got 1,000 workers in Rolls-Royce in Derby, and a training school that's been set up building the nuclear-powered submarines for Australia. And we also have some jobs being created to build a 6th-generation fighter jet. And this 6th-generation fighter jet for Japan is particularly dubious, that even some experts are criticising the arrangement because the costs are seriously underestimated. So we're organising and trying to make an impact on trade unions. Our trade union congress last year actually voted a resolution in support of increased military spending. And so we're trying to mobilise opposition against this. And incidentally, I should say that the timescale on AUKUS and on the fighter jets is absolutely extraordinary. These military people are talking about projects to address what they call the threat environment for 2040 to 2070. I mean, it's absolutely insane when, we have a strike wave, particularly of public sector workers. People are being crushed by the cost of living crisis. So we're trying to raise the question of military spending and trying to counter the arguments on jobs. Far more jobs can be created in the public sector, pound for pound, than in military industries, which are very capital intensive. The military industries, these new jobs that are being created, are competing for skills against skills that are needed in the green transition. So linking up, I think, also with green campaigners can be useful. We certainly would like the Australian trade unions to send a message, or to send messages to our trade unions in Britain, particularly the trade union councils that are in the areas where these new jobs are being created.
Thank you so much, Comrade Holm and Dr. Clegg, for your informative presentations and for answering those questions. Next, we are going to give the floor to Comrade Kenny Coyle, representing the Communist Party of Britain. Comrade Coyle, the floor is yours.
Hi, comrades. First of all, can you hear me okay? Is the connection good?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Well, first of all, many thanks indeed, and congratulations to the CPUSA for this initiative. It's sadly very timely. The struggle for peace and against imperialism never goes away, but I think many of us will feel that the times that we're living in right now are among the most dangerous that humanity has ever faced. I wanted to make a couple of points in relation to the role of the United Kingdom, the role of British imperialism, because there is sometimes a tendency to view imperialism and war as emanating solely from Washington and from the Pentagon and so on. Now, whilst that's largely true, because US imperialism is the dominant imperialist power, it's also worth taking into consideration the fact that US power is also diffused from any number of points with other regional imperialist powers. Now, in the case of Britain, Britain's imperialist past is something which I think is relatively well known amongst the left. But its continuing importance as an imperialist power is often overlooked, including by some sections of the British left, unfortunately. Firstly, because Britain is a nuclear power. It is one of the largest arsenals of nuclear weapons in the world. After 2021, there was a defence review by the British government, which proposed a 30% increase in the number of nuclear warheads held by the United Kingdom. That would take it from 200 to 260 warheads, which incidentally is also a violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we get an idea of the direction that Britain's ruling class want to travel. We also have the plans for the enhancement of a new fleet of Trident submarines. That's the main nuclear strike force that Britain has. That's been estimated at least £205 billion. I'm not sure what that is in US dollars, but it's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money which could be going into, as Jenny and others said, could be going into any number of social projects, public services, and simply reindustrializing large sections of the economy, which don't have to be related to the military-industrial complex. The skills are there to do any number of important economic projects. So while we've got austerity at home, the series of Tory governments that we've had, or Tory prime ministers that we've had, because essentially it's the same government, has embarked on this idea of war at home and war against the working people at home and war against everybody else overseas. It's important not to underestimate the continuing importance of British imperialism, least of all because Britain remains a UN Security Council permanent member. Britain is a G7 member, and we've seen how that has been militarized as well. Britain has the fourth largest military budget. It's embedded in NATO. It's now embedded in the AUKUS project, which was referred to earlier. And the British arms industry is one of the few areas of industrial and manufacturing that was left untouched by the Tories from the Thatcher period onward. Britain is one of the largest exporters of arms of any country in the world after the United States. So in terms of the military threat from British imperialism, it's quite obvious. Other areas are in the military intelligence sector. We can see this from the Ukraine war, where the Ministry of Defence briefings are used to essentially set the agenda, set the tone of media coverage, at least in the English-speaking world. Britain is involved in the Five Eyes alliance, again, an military intelligence gathering operation. And these are just some of the aspects of British imperialism which are often overlooked, naturally because of the predominance of US imperialism. But Britain's junior role, allied role, is a very important one. Recent research showed, in fact, that Britain has a military presence in 42 different countries and territories, around 145 military bases of varying sizes and importance. Thankfully, fairly recently, it lost Hong Kong, not once, but twice, arguably. And one can only imagine what would be happening now if Hong Kong remained a colony of British imperialism, how Hong Kong would have been used. And that was the attempt really in the protests and riots that went on in Hong Kong several years ago, which thankfully were rebuffed. And I was in Hong Kong very recently, and the normality of the place is fantastic to see again. So Britain's military importance to the US is quite significant. Britain has a military presence from the South Atlantic to the South Pacific, in places like the Falkland Islands, where Britain fought a war, right through to the Pitcairn Islands, where British territory has something like 1 million square miles of territory, maritime territory. And yet at the same time, British-Chinese relations are at an all-time low, which is remarkable because unlike the US, Britain established diplomatic relations with China very early on. In 1950 was the first exchange of diplomatic relations. That was 30 years almost before the United States recognized the People's Republic of China. Since 1972, when Britain removed a consulate from Taiwan, Britain has actually also been much more open about acknowledging the reality that Taiwan is indeed a part of China, that Taiwan is a Chinese territory. But at the same time, what we're seeing in the most recent period is a major pushback on this. We're seeing all-party campaigns, and they are being led by right-wing conservatives, right-wing Tories, but they're also unfortunately being backed by some influential sections within the Labour Party and other groups to try to grant kind of de facto recognition of Taiwan as a separate entity. In 2021, for the very first time, the Royal Navy sent a warship, a frigate, HMS Richmond, through the Strait of Taiwan. This was the first time that a military ship had gone through. Previously, the Royal Navy had sent survey ships, but this was the first time that a warship had gone through. So this is a real heightening of tension, a real attack on China's sovereignty, and a real provocation against China. So it's very important that we can have these kind of international gatherings where comrades from different countries and different movements can express their views and exchange their experiences. I think that we are, those of us who are in the imperialist countries also recognize that we are very much in the minority. The collective West, or the North Atlantic Alliance, doesn't speak for the world's majority. The global South is already making that quite clear. And there are really positive changes going on in most parts of the world where this unipolar model of the United States is being rejected. So I think that there are very positive things, but at the same time, there are extremely serious dangers to world peace. I think that we're going to see more provocations in Taiwan. And I visited Taiwan just a month or so ago. The situation there is quite normal, quite calm. But the hysteria of Western media, CNN, Guardian, New York Times, is quite astonishing. So we need to be prepared for the fact that there's likely to be a whole series of provocations in the Taiwan Strait, especially with the elections coming up in 2024. I suspect that we will see a lot of operations by naval flotillas and fleets designed deliberately to provoke the People's Republic and to try to enhance the tensions in Taiwan itself in order to influence the elections. So I think we need to keep our eye open there, as well, of course, as seeing how the events, tragic, terrible events in Ukraine and Russia are going to develop. But I think that I suspect that Taiwan is going to be the next flashpoint. So I hope that's given some very brief idea of what we think in the British Communist Party. I think it will give some idea of our analysis. We have a Congress coming up in November this year, which will add to our analysis and fill in some of the details. I hope the Comrades will follow that debate. It will be on the party's website, and of course, it'll also be in the Morning Star. And if Comrades have access to digital editions of the Morning Star, I think you've got one of the best resources for peace, anti-imperialism and socialism that you can possibly get. So again, thank you very much to the Comrades of the CPUSA. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and I really hope that this will be a successful launching pad for further meetings of this kind. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Comrade Coyle, for your great contributions. We will now give the floor to Comrade Vatuan Ngoc, who is Deputy Director General of the Americas Department of the Communist Party of Vietnam's Commission for External Relations.
On the occasion of the Second Vietnam International Conference hosted by Communist Party of the United States of America, on behalf of the Commission of External Relations of Central Committee of Communist Party of Vietnam, I would like to extend to the conference and to the conference to a member of Communist Party of the United States of America and the representative of Communist Party our warmest greetings. Dear comrades, peace, cooperation, and development have maintained to be major trends. However, the world and the region continue to experience rapid and complicated development, having multifaceted impacts on security and development, environment of both country and region. Geopolitical, geo-economic shift, and great power competition are creating great hope in the state of the world. They are altogether a lot of unpredictable factors having multidimensional impact on security and development environment of various countries, where opportunity and challenges are deeply interwoven. The conflict erupted in the middle of Europe has caused immense consequences on security, political, economic, and societal landscape of the whole world. On top of this, traditional and non-traditional security challenges such as climate change, natural disaster, resource depletion, energy, water, food, human, and cyber security has been developing in complex ways. This state of affairs greatly affects various nations and the effort to realize United Nations 2023 Sustainable Development Goals. Dear comrades, such global development urges us to step up cooperation, engagement, and sharing ideas to build a better world together. For over 35 years of development, Vietnam has attained substantial and historic achievement to get strong and comprehensive development. The economy has risen 7% on average annually. The GDP has increased 17 times higher than that of before 1986. Vietnam has been one out of a group of low-income countries since 2008. The economy is now fourth largest in Asia and accepted by United Nations and development partners as one of the economies with the highest level of economic integration among developing countries. We aim for sustainable development. We have implemented a Millennium Development, and we are making good progress in the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Vietnam is in a consistent pursuit of a foreign policy of independence, autonomy, peace, cooperation, development and diversification, and multilateralization of Eastern relations, equality, cooperation, mutual benefit, to combine the nation's strength with that of the time, and be proactive and active in comprehensive and in-depth international integration. Vietnam is a reliable partner and an active and responsible member of the international community. Vietnam wants to make a direct contribution to the process of dialogue and peace and to international conflict settlement, to international dialogues and peaceful measures. Vietnam always asserts to strengthen and reinforce the solidarity and cooperation with the Communist and Worker Party, left-wing parties, and revolutionary and progressive movement in the world. Vietnam is always look forward to liberating oppressed people, equality, and social and human progress. The Communist Party of Vietnam gestures this and take a great importance, a valuable support that American communist people have rendered to Vietnamese people in a past struggle for national independence, as well as in the recent call for national development, socialist construction, and defense. It is our conviction that the Communist Party of the United States of America will continue making contributions to consolidate its forces and enhance its role and voice in American life and meet the new challenges. May the relationship of solidarity and cooperation between Communist Party of Vietnam and Communist Party of the United States of America, between the Vietnamese people and American people, be increasingly consolidated and developed. May the conference be crowned with success.
Thank you, Comrade Vatswan Nok. We will now give the floor to Comrade Dina Altai of the Central Committee of the Iraqi Communist Party.
Dear comrades, I bring warm greetings and best wishes on behalf of the Iraqi Communist Party to your international conference and all participants. The initiative by the Fraternal Communist Party of the USA is highly appreciated as it contributes to international solidarity and strengthening the relations between young communists and their joint struggles to build a better world. It is also a unique opportunity to exchange valuable experiences and provide insight into struggles taking place under the specific national conditions all over the world. Dear comrades, Iraqi communists, along with the fraternal parties and progressive forces in the world, continue to face global and local challenges. World peace and humanity are today facing grave dangers which constitute the greatest threats since the Second World War and the end of Cold War, including threats to use nuclear weapons. The continuing war between Russia and Ukraine has been exploited by imperialist powers, led by the US and NATO, to fuel war hysteria as well as far-right movements, populism, racism, and fascism. We have joined peace-loving forces in the world in condemning this war and calling for its immediate end and for negotiation to ensure the right of both people to live in peace and security. We have also called the ending of illegal US economic blockade in Cuba and criminal violation of human rights of Cuban people. In the Middle East, the people's struggle against imperialism is closely interconnected with fight for peace, national sovereignty, freedom, democracy, and social justice. We call for international solidarity with the just struggle of Palestinian people to end Israeli occupation and for the right to self-determination, to set up their own independent national state on their homeland with Jerusalem as its capital. We have also called for an immediate end to the continuing bloody war in Sudan, which is a power struggle among the military rulers and is fueled by foreign interference. We call upon you to support legitimate aspiration for Sudanese people and their democratic forces for freedom, social justice, democratic civil rule. Dear comrades, 20 years of US war and occupation, Iraq is still suffering of the consequences of ongoing deep structural political crisis and endemic corruption. The root cause of this crisis is ethno-sectarian power-sharing system that was installed after that war and the end of Saddam dictatorship in 2003. Young people constitute more than half of the population of Iraq, which is estimated 43 million. The employment rate for the people aged between 15 and 29 years is nearly to 23%, according to official figures. It is much higher among young women at 56%. The gap between the rich and poor continues to grow wider, despite Iraq being the sixth largest oil producer. Iraqi young people have been actively involved in mass protest movements against the rule of political sectarianism and corruption, calling for change. The protests that escalated since 2011 express the desire for truly democratic Iraq, based on the principle of citizenship, respect for human rights, and achieving social justice. A courageous popular uprising erupted on 1st October 2019 as a result of vicious repression by security forces and militia targeting young, peaceful protesters. More than 800 were killed and 2,000 injured. 6 of our comrades, young Iraqi communists, were among the martyrs. Despite the bloody suppression of that heroic uprising, the protests are continuing against the political bankrupt system and corruption. Iraqi communist youth are also actively involved today in various fronts of struggle, including in the fight of women's rights and trade union rights and defending human and democratic rights. They are also active participants along with the social movement in confronting the huge environmental challenges that the country is facing. Iraq is the 5th most effective country by impact of climate change. As a result of water policies by neighboring countries, Turkey and Iran, Iraq is in danger of becoming a land without rivers by 2040, with the drying up of Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Dear comrades, Iraqi communists, along with democratic forces, are continuing the fight for comprehensive change and building a democratic civil state based on social justice. In this difficult struggle, we look forward to your continued support and international solidarity with the Iraqi people and democratic forces. Allow me once again to express our high appreciation of organizing this international conference, wishing it every success, long live peace and international solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Altai. We will now give the floor to Comrade George Kokumas, a member of parliament and member of the Central Committee of AKEL, our fraternal party in Cyprus.
Dear comrades from the eastern end of the Mediterranean and from our party AKEL, we convey the warmest greetings to the International Conference of the Communist Party of the United States of America. We take this opportunity to express our appreciation and respect to all of you, communists of the United States of America, who in an extremely adverse environment represent the enduring spirit of equality, justice and solidarity. Comrades, your conference is taking place at turbulent times. The exchange of experience amongst Communist and Workers' Party is invaluable, not to copy each other's policies, but to enrich our thinking and analysis. We are inspired by the actions of fraternal parties, we learn about the problems and struggles of the peoples of the world, and of course, we strengthen the international solidarity between us. This is precisely why we feel the need to take this opportunity to express AKEL's appreciation to the Communist Party of the United States for its consistent and stable commitment to supporting the struggle of the people of Cyprus for freedom and reunification. As many of you will know, our homeland, Cyprus, has been violently divided since 1974 due to Turkey's continued occupation of 37% of its territory. Our people, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, have been separated for decades due to the Turkish occupation and the forces of nationalism and chauvinism that contribute to its perpetuation. Indeed, the persistence of the Cyprus problem, as it has come to be known, is an example of the hypocrisy of Western imperialism. United Nations resolutions on the Cyprus problem have never been implemented, with the primary responsibility levied squarely on the shoulders of the occupying power, Turkey, which, however, remains a valuable strategic partner of the United States and the European Union, a leading force in NATO, and a privileged buyer of American weapons. In other words, the same forces that are fueling the fire of war in Ukraine in the name of countering the Russian invasion have been turning a blind eye for 50 years now to the occupation and division of Cyprus, because in this case the aggressor is a NATO power. The struggle for the liberation and reunification of the island and our people is AKEL's primary strategic goal. To this end, we have channeled our unwavering dedication and efforts to resume the talks for the unification under the auspices of the United Nations that were interrupted in 2017, so that we can achieve a solution to the Cyprus problem. We consider a viable solution one that liberates Cyprus from Turkish troops, abolishes Turkey's guarantees and intervention rights, and allows the Republic of Cyprus to evolve into a federal state co-administered by the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot community. In this context, a decisive element of our policy is the action against nationalism and the reapproachment between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. Just last month, the Pan-Cyprian Federation of Labour and the Turkish Cypriot unions, members of the World Federation of Trade Unions, once again celebrated May Day together in a mass event held in the UN control buffer zone that divides our island. Another top priority for us is the fight against the NATOization and militarization of our island, which has always had a significant geostrategic importance for the great powers of the world. Although Cyprus is an EU member state, it is not, until today, a member of either NATO or other NATO programs. To a significant extent, this is the result of the strong dedication and decisive efforts of AKEL and the popular movement of Cyprus. We refuse to allow our homeland, our island, to become a military base for the West to control the Middle East, nor an unsinkable aircraft carrier as the imperialists historically saw our island. During the last few years, in which the previous right-wing government, like the current one, have promoted a one-sided pro-Western policy, AKEL has strongly objected inside and outside the parliament the military cooperation with the neighboring state of Israel and the United States. Instead, we advocated the need for a principled foreign policy based on international law and the promotion of peace and solidarity among the struggling people of our region. At the same time, AKEL has stood decisively as the voice of Cypriot workers. In the last decade, Cyprus has been hit by the global economic crisis, while the policies of the right-wing government have aggravated social inequalities and corruption. Just to cite a recent example, AKEL has fought to achieve improvements to minimum wage policies, as well as to fully restore the cost of living adjustment, a measure established in collective agreements that protects wages from inflation, and to extend it to every employee in the country. The main battle of the next period, which we will fight both in the workplace and with pressure on the government through the parliament, is the expansion of collective labour agreements to the country's private sector. At the same time, for the last 2 months, in the free part of the island, we have been running a campaign for housing, with events, mobilizations, meetings with government officials, state agencies, social movements and NGOs. We have highlighted our proposed solution for the housing problem of young couples, students, vulnerable groups and borrowers who are crushed by the arbitrary policies of the banks. Comrades, as you know, AKEL is a respectable political force in our country. However, the 2021 parliamentary elections yielded an admittedly negative outcome for AKEL, dropping our share of the electoral vote to 22%. Of course, we remain the second largest political party on the island, and we have 15 out of 56 seats in the House of Representatives. Last February, in the presidential elections, AKEL supported an independent progressive candidate who gathered in the second round of the elections 48.5% against the current president. Although we did not succeed in electing our candidate, the result contains hopeful elements since the most progressive part of the country joined us, while the candidate we supported clearly prevailed among the youth. Now, an important electoral landmark before us are the two big battles that will be held in 2024. The elections for the local self-government and the elections for the 6 representatives of Cyprus in the European Parliament. Before us, we also have the holding next autumn of the Party Congress, which will discuss changes in the internal structure, operation and procedures of the party, as well as new forms of cooperation with forces from the wider progressive spectrum. We are optimistic that in 3 years from now, when we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of Cyprus, AKEL, we will also be able to talk about the full recovery of our party and the Cypriot left as a whole. With these thoughts, comrades, we wish you every success for a productive conference, and we reaffirm our solidarity with the efforts of the Communist Party of the United States towards our shared ideals, our shared visions. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you, Comrade Kokumas. We will now be giving the floor to Comrade Liz Rowley, the leader of the Communist Party of Canada.
Dear comrades, on behalf of the Communist Party of Canada, I would first like to express our appreciation for the invitation to participate in this international seminar. Indeed, the international situation is extremely volatile and very dangerous. Imperialism's proxy war in Ukraine threatens to expand as NATO countries and military forces surround Russia. The use of tactical nuclear weapons is being discussed openly, though there is no such thing as a tactical nuclear war. In fact, this is the road to Armageddon. The forces for peace and nuclear disarmament, which have been very weak for almost 2 decades, are finding their voice in Canada in this very dangerous situation, despite the pro-war, Cold War, and anti-communist propaganda that has saturated our country. New peace organizations affiliated to the Canadian Peace Congress and the World Peace Council are forming in Canada's big cities. The Canadian Labour Congress, which met in convention in April, adopted a resolution calling for a peaceful negotiated solution to the war in Ukraine, despite a continuing campaign by right-wing Ukrainian nationalists and the Canadian government to escalate the war and Canada's involvement in it. An immediate ceasefire, the withdrawal of all foreign troops, and the negotiation of a political solution is the only way out. And it is urgent, the more so because of U.S. opposition to peace negotiations. Similarly, the campaign to end the 60-year-old blockade of Cuba and to remove Cuba from the list of countries named by the U.S. government as state sponsors of terrorism has growing support in Canada. This is due to the work of the Canadian Network on Cuba and to the fact that over 1 million Canadian tourists visit Cuba every year and can see for themselves the reality of Cuba, its flourishing democracy, equality, its universal health care and education, its new family code, and also the horrendous impact of the blockade and the sanctions imposed by the Biden administration. Cuba is the bright light and inspiration of socialism in the Americas, of national sovereignty and independence, peace and development in this hemisphere. The blockade must be broken, the sanctions dropped, and the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism by the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world has to be stopped. In fact, Canada's foreign policy has shifted from supporter of U.S. imperialist wars and aggression to a leading participant in U.S. military ventures. This includes efforts to overthrow the Maduro government of Venezuela, continuing interventions in Haiti, and the wars on Yugoslavia, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and now the new Cold War on China, which threatens to become a hot war with the formation of AUKUS and the deployment of nuclear-powered submarines in Australia. Canada also has a new policy that will increase our military involvement and interference in that region. Only days ago, a Canadian frigate and a U.S. warship were involved in a near collision with a Chinese ship in the Taiwan Straits. These are very dangerous acts of war. Today, global inflation and the economic recession has hit hard at workers, unemployed and precarious workers, while generating enormous profits and further concentrating and centralizing capital. Its inability to avoid or remediate ever-deepening crises is a sign of capitalism's decay, not its strength. Growing reaction and the reappearance of fascism on every continent is a consequence of capitalism in crisis, and the reason to hurry the struggle for democracy and socialism and the building of a strong and powerful working-class movement. This combines with the global struggle against climate change, for urgent action on carbon emission reductions, and for environmental justice. The impacts of climate change are being felt everywhere, creating catastrophic conditions in countries around the world and generating unprecedented mass migrations and a global refugee crisis. In Canada, corporate greed and power, combined with the policies of the government and the Bank of Canada, has driven down wages, employment, and living standards with 9 interest rate hikes in 15 months, with the promise of more to come. The housing crisis, which was acute before the interest rate hikes, has now become a cause of inflation, as housing prices continue to rise after a brief fall. Homeowners with mortgages are facing huge increases in monthly payments, and banks are preparing for significant numbers of mortgage defaults. Tenants, too, are facing skyrocketing rents and evictions. Interest rate hikes have also affected credit cards, which many working people use to pay for rent and groceries. Personal bankruptcies are rising fast, along with small business bankruptcies. As a result of these policies, Canada has the highest level of household debt amongst the G7 countries, according to the IMF. After a long period of labor peace and quiet, the strike movement is growing as real wages and living standards dive. Building trades, rail and transportation workers, and other private sector unions struck for real wage hikes and COLA, while the public sector unions in healthcare and education linked their demands for better pay and benefits to the fight for better public services. Right-wing provincial governments, which had been chipping away at universal Medicare for more than a decade, moved on to a full-blown offensive this spring, with legislation that encouraged private for-profit healthcare businesses to set up and compete with the public system. The Prime Minister, whose job it is to defend Medicare, called the provincial legislation innovative. In fact, the federal government has been starving hospitals and healthcare for years, creating these conditions in which the provinces can now move. Nurses and healthcare workers have been ringing the bells about the cuts for years, including the province-wide walkout in Alberta. A similar situation exists in public and post-secondary education and throughout the public sector as the privatizers make their move. At the recent CLC convention, it was evident that workers are ready and willing to fight, and are fighting, on the shop floor and the workplace, in collective bargaining and in defense of public services. Also evident was the poverty of leadership, the absence of a plan of resistance, of mass independent labor political action, which is what the current situation and the delegates urgently called on their leadership to deliver. Our party launched a mass campaign this spring to expose the myth that workers are the cause of inflation, and to demand that the government roll back prices and interest rates, raise wages and incomes, and curb corporate power. We distributed 80,000 leaflets and collected thousands of signatures on our petition to Parliament with these demands. The campaign will continue with new materials until Parliament resumes in the fall, when we will deliver our petitions in a mass protest on Parliament Hill, on the way to further mobilizations after that. Shamefully, the NDP and Greens are largely silent on the impacts and causes of the economic crisis, while cheerleading military spending and the war in Ukraine. Key here is the trade union movement and its capacity to mobilize its allies in a mass struggle for jobs, wages, rising living standards, and defense of public services and social programs. We call for a People's Coalition to come together to fight for these economic and social priorities and for an end to war and military spending, and to divert these huge expenditures to social spending. These ideas have widespread support in Canada and have contributed to a growing interest in the Communist Party and in socialism. Dear comrades, similar struggles are underway in countries around the world, in various stages of advance or in some cases setbacks, by the working class and democratic forces. Canadian Communists stand in solidarity and in unity with all of our comrades in struggle around the world. Capitalism is the problem. The future is socialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Rowley. We will now show a video produced by the CPUSA International Department on Cold War 2.0.
As the 21st century unfolds, the global balance of power has experienced a significant shift. China's unprecedented economic growth has propelled it to the forefront, challenging the West's long-standing dominance, a position unchallenged since the illegal dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. This tectonic shift has led to a new geopolitical era that some are calling Cold War 2.0. When we look back to the 1930s and 40s, the United States and China found common ground and partnership, uniting against Imperial Japanese forces during their conquest of China and the Pacific. This partnership dissolved following the surrender of the Japanese forces, and the Chinese Civil War resumed, culminating in the victory of the Communist Party in 1949.
中华人民共和国中央人民政府主席毛泽东。中国共产党万岁！毛主席万岁！
After World War II, the victorious Allied powers found themselves at odds over the future of Europe. With the divide between the Soviet-influenced East and American-controlled West, the era of the Cold War had begun. This ideological battle fueled a deep-rooted anti-communism within the United States.
Unless we understand and work effectively for the principles upon which our American way of life is founded, the structure will crumble and our heritage of freedom will perish.
Back home, the U.S. grappled with the perceived threat of a growing socialist bloc. Fears of communism manifested in frenzied witch hunts within government, media, and society at large. This period, known as the era of McCarthyism, was characterized by widespread political conformity and the persecution of those perceived to be communist sympathizers. Fast forward to the end of the Cold War, marked by the dissolution of the USSR and the decommunization of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Despite plunging the region into poverty, this event enabled the United States and its Western allies to ascend to the position of global hegemon without significant opposition. The U.S. adopted an approach of full-spectrum dominance, employing a range of tactics in its quest for global control, including hybrid warfare techniques. However, the 2008 Great Recession marked a turning point in global dynamics.
The stock market suffered one of its worst days in years.
The market is not functioning properly. There has been a widespread loss of confidence, and major sectors of America's financial system are at risk of shutting down.
The signs were everywhere, but now it's official, we are in a recession.
While the U.S. and the West face significant economic challenges due to the housing market crash, China's economy grew at near double-digit rates. As a global manufacturing powerhouse, China's ties with the global South began to rival those of the West. The Belt and Road Initiative symbolizes China's rising prominence in world affairs as the largest infrastructure development project in history. But China's ascendancy hasn't been uncontested. The U.S.'s announcement of the pivot to Asia in 2011 was a clear sign of the start of a new Cold War. In 2017, a U.S. national security document explicitly identified Russia and China as the main adversaries in this new era of superpower contention. Then President Trump launched a tariff war against China in 2018, imposing restrictions on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. The US has increasingly targeted Chinese technology companies like Huawei and TikTok, while also rekindling controversy over the One China policy. In a recent response to these developments, China's foreign minister issued a stern warning on March 7, 2023.
如果美方不踩刹车，继续沿着错误的道路狂飙下去，再多的护栏也挡不住脱轨翻车，陷入
The motives behind the US's confrontational stance towards China are crucial to understand. Through diplomacy and economic development, China has been gaining influence and forming partnerships with nations that were previously marginalized by Western institutions. Despite the claims of the State Department, the US is not primarily concerned with human rights within China or its partner states. The United States' ultimate goal is to regain its position as the world's economic and military superpower, reclaiming the capacity to influence the global South.
All right, we will now give the floor to Comrade Simfiwe Dlamini, International Secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland.
Dear comrade, my name is Dlamini Simfiwe, the International Secretary of the Communist Party of Swaziland. The Communist Party of Swaziland sent its warm revolutionary greetings to the delegates who have attended this important international conference. We also send our greetings to the working class of US and also the working class around the world. We all know that this conference will contribute to raise the internationalist and the anti-imperialist character to the working class of USA. We appreciate to be part of this important discussion. We cannot deny that as this international conference sits, we see a drastic change of shift of balance around the world, where we can see the right wing losing the ground and the left wing occupying it. We cannot deny that the competition amongst the capitalists and the imperialists for the control of market, trade routes, raw material, and energy resources have led to the conflict around the world. The war in the Middle East and in some part of Africa, that's what led to those wars. When we see all those challenges imposed by the imperialists, we know that it is a class question. The imperialists are trying to neutralize the revolutionary character of the working class around the world. What we see in Ukraine war, where we see the imperialists trying to extend its aggression to the east. The working class of Ukraine, it is the one that suffers the most. That's why it needs to stand up and deny NATO and the US the leverage of making their country a war zone. We are in solidarity with the people of China as we see the Cold War is escalating. We are also extending our solidarity with the people of Cuba, where we have seen them being suffocated for a very long time by the embargo and the sanctions, just because the imperialists are trying to deny the Cuban people to choose their rightful destination. As the Communist Party of Swaziland, we are in a struggle for democracy. And we have understood that it is not possible to win, to materialize the struggle for democracy now in Swaziland as long as we don't receive the practical international solidarity around the world. As the communist parties around the world, we need to unite and raise consciousness of the working class. All the conflict around the world will be resolved by taking the working class in the route for socialism. We will always extend our solidarity around the world. That's why we will continue to send our solidarity with the working class of Venezuela that they are being attacked. We also send our solidarity with the people of Palestine. We also send our solidarity with the people of South Sahara. Long live internationalism, long live Long live socialism, long live. Long live democracy, long live. Down with imperialism, down.
Thank you, Comrade Zilmini, for your message. We will now give the floor to Comrade Renate Koppe, International Secretary of the German Communist Party.
Dear comrades, my name is Renate Koppe and I'm responsible for international relations in the Secretariat of the Central Committee of the German Communist Party. I greet the participants of your conference and all communists in the USA in the name of our party. Today, I do not want to speak in general terms about the situation in which the US and NATO are aggressively pursuing a war against Russia and prospectively against socialist China. I would like to deal with how this policy is backed up by imperialist propaganda here in the FRG. An example of this is May 8th and 9th, the Day of Liberation from Fascism and Victory Day. In Berlin, where there are many monuments to the Soviet soldiers who liberated Europe from fascism, the Soviet flag, the flag of victory, the hammer and sickle symbol, Russian flags and anything that might have a connection to Russia were banned, up to clothes whose colors were interpreted by the police in such a way. On the other hand, the blue and yellow flags of the nationalist fascist Kiev regime were allowed. This ban also affected our party flags in many places, if on them, as is often the case, the hammer and sickle can be found. Joint tributes to the Red Army soldiers killed in the liberation of Europe from fascism by municipal authorities and representatives of the Embassy of Russia have not been held for 2 years. Unfortunately, a leading role in this is played by the party, the left. This fits in with the equalization of fascist Germany with the socialist Soviet Union, which allegedly were equally involved in the beginning of the Second World War, that has been spread in official statements in Germany and the EU for several years. This anti-Sovietism passes seamlessly into hostility against Russia, because Russia does not go along with this falsification of history. Comrades of our party and other anti-fascists have opposed this falsification as much as possible on May 8th and 9th, especially in Berlin, where there were the mentioned bans. In Treptow Park and at other memorials for fallen Red Army soldiers, we have been visible despite bans and repressive measures of the police, with our flags, with flags of victory, and our slogans against fascism and war, against the NATO war against Russia, and against the support of the Ukrainian regime with weapons and finances. Our party has also participated in the honoring of the Red Army soldiers by the Embassy of the Russian Federation. Despite all the repressions, the Immortal Regiment also took place again in Berlin, initiated by people of Russian origin. Communists and anti-fascists did not let repressions prevent us from expressing our gratitude to the Red Army, in which soldiers from all peoples of the Soviet Union fought and which liberated us from fascism. Such actions also took place in other cities of Germany, often including solidarity with the Donbass. The struggle against NATO's war policy, the demand Germany out of NATO, is one of our central fields of struggle. A field of struggle where the common international struggle of communists is particularly important and which cannot be separated from the struggle against the falsification of history.
Thank you, Comrade Koppe. We will now give the floor to a performance from the esteemed musician David Rovics.
Fifth month of the year, on the 1st of May, known around the world as International Workers' Day. You'll still see people marching in every corner of the earth. St. John to Santiago, Kerala to Perth, all keeping alive the fantasy, what could happen down the line when the workers of the world combine. You can see us gathering early in the morn, Some are celebrating the shackles we have shorn, while so many billions are just waiting for the moment that we might stop losing the class war, when someday we can all say, yeah, we're doing fine. When the workers of the world combine. When that time arrives, maybe it looks like May Day, like a festival that comes home and doesn't go away. Every race and gender, every walk and station, with the working class united, every land and nation. Then just watch what happens when we follow the same sign. When the workers of the world combine. Fifth month of the year, on the 1st of May, known around the world as International Workers' Day.
Thank you, Mr. Rovics, for your performance. We will now give the floor to Comrade Paulius Eidukas, representative of the Young Communists in Norway and the Communist Party of Norway.
Dear comrades and friends, on behalf of the Communist Party of Norway and the Young Communists in Norway, I would like to extend our fraternal greetings to the Communist Party USA, the Young Communist League USA, and all the other communist parties participating in this international conference. We thank the CPUSA especially for organizing this event. We have long admired your internationalism and your efforts to bring together communists from all around the world to share our experiences and struggles for the working class, for peace and socialism, against capitalism, imperialism, and war. We have watched and admire your struggle in the belly of the beast, the United States. It is inspiring to see your activity in the organizing of the labor movement in the US, especially the successes with Amazon workers, Starbucks workers, auto workers, teachers, and so on. We also admire your political activism as you are defending the rights of indigenous people, people of color, immigrants, women, transgender people, and all the marginalized communities that are suffering from the ever-increasing attacks from right-wing politicians. We're also inspired by your presence online. It is great to see the activity that your party does in terms of journalism, political analysis, and daily articles. It is also great to see the activity of your rank and file on social media networks, proudly identifying themselves with the CPUSA as they do their best to spread important news and to educate others on Marxist theory and socialist history. It is something that we in the Communist Party of Norway seek to replicate. This year, on the 4th of November, the Communist Party of Norway will be celebrating its centenary. We will be hosting a 2-day event in Oslo, inviting communists from Norway and beyond to partake in the celebration of our party's rich history and its 100-year-long continuity. We remember our roots in the Norwegian workers' movement, as well as the fierce anti-fascist resistance of our young comrades against the Nazi occupation of Norway during the Second World War. Every 1st of May, we start the day early to commemorate this history and to thank our martyrs who gave their lives in the struggle for freedom and socialism. All of the local branches of our party are active in the workers' struggle in Norway. We are always present during important demonstrations, such as those against war and imperialism, against the militarization of Norway, against NATO and the US military bases on our territory. We are also active in the struggle for Palestinian rights, for women's rights, for LGBT rights, and all other national and international issues. Although our party is small, having suffered from state surveillance and persecution, splits and decline during the Cold War, today we are punching above our weight in many respects. Our party has been rapidly growing in the southern part of Norway thanks to the hard work of the comrades there, led by our General Secretary, Runa Evensen. We are also very active in the Norwegian solidarity movement with Cuba and Latin America. When it comes to our Communist Youth Organization, it has also had a difficult history of splits and decline, having been essentially inactive in the past several years. However, the Young Communists in Norway have last year held a national congress where new leadership was elected, which is currently working day and night to activate our organization to do what is necessary in order to get it back up and running again, as we seek to recruit young people from all around the country. We do this not just for the sake of the Young Communists, but also for the Communist Party. In our last Congress, it was decided that the youth movement has to be prioritized to balance the rapidly aging membership and to ensure the long-term continuity of the Communist Party of Norway. Once again, we would like to thank the Communist Party USA for organizing this international conference. We hope that events like these will become commonplace, as it is important for communists around the world to communicate and to learn from each other's experiences. We thank you for your efforts in strengthening these bonds of solidarity and internationalism. Long live the international workers' movement. Long live the international struggle for socialism and communism.
Thank you, Comrade Idukas. We will now give the floor to Comrade Rocio Reyes, representing the youth of the Communist Party of Honduras.
Hola a todos y todas. Yo soy Rocío de la Juventud del Partido Comunista de Honduras. Es un gusto estar saludándoles, aunque sea por esta vía. Pero aún por esta vía nos permitimos hablar de estos temas tan importantes como lo es el internacionalismo, tan oportuno en estos tiempos, porque nos recuerda que no estamos solos, que cada lucha de cada país es una sola en realidad, y que esa lucha es una lucha de clase, y que la clase con la que siempre vamos a estar es la clase obrera, y que no importa el país desde donde estemos luchando, siempre nos identificaremos desde esa posición, y yo creo que esa unidad internacional se hace cada vez más fuerte. Este tipo de eventos nos hacen recordar o hacer un llamado a solidarizarnos con países que enfrentan ataques del imperialismo, precisamente por hacerle frente al capitalismo, y que están intentando construir sistemas diferentes. Países como Cuba, como Venezuela, como Nicaragua. Les mandamos un abrazo solidario. Y bueno, también desde Honduras estamos intentando construir un sistema diferente, que no es una tarea fácil, pero ahí vamos. Un saludo a todos y un abrazo fraterno y un abrazo comunista.
Thank you, Comrade Reyes. We will now give the floor to Comrade Renato Fersoni, representative of the International Department of the Young Communist League of Britain.
The Young Communist League of Britain is honored to send greetings to our comrades in the Communist Party USA on the occasion of their international conference. Internationalism is one of the core principles of a socialist revolution, and it's in times like the ones we are living in now, with the escalation of the imperialist war and increasing hostility towards socialist countries, that this principle assumes even more value, and upholding it becomes even more important. When capitalism attacks our lives in the workplaces, workers form unions to fight back. When capitalism attacks our lives in our nations, then workers will form parties and other organizations to fight back. And when the capitalists bring entire countries to war with each other, then international solidarity among workers is how we fight back and change the course of history for the better. In times of war, the capitalist class of a country will go out of their way, spending enormous amount of resources to ensure that workers get united under the banner on their imperialist war, making it look like the war is representative of our interests as workers and of the interests of the whole nation. They make it look like there's something patriotic in risking our lives and killing other workers abroad, while instead the true purpose is to increase the share on the global market for the capitalist class. While in normal times or relative peace, the capitalist class of a country will go out of their way to keep the workforce divided, and to encourage workers to fight each other over wages within their own nations, A great example for this is the attitude of the Democratic and Republican parties, who are spectacularly good at polarizing opposite views around the vast majority of the issues, but then they are capable of finding common ground in the new Cold War against China, the continuous oppression of the Cuban people with an economic blockade which has lasted for over 6 years, and managing to make Democratic Party voters support wars initiated by Republican governments and vice versa, as in the war against Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and many others, which have resulted in the death of millions of innocent people. All of this death and destruction is being enabled by a distorted meaning of patriotism, distorted by the ruling class for the purpose of imperialism. In this scenario, the solidarity among the workers of one nation can become the first step toward the international solidarity among the workers of all nations. Because when the unity of the working class is the product of solidarity rather than national chauvinism, then it assumes a revolutionary character. We're used to thinking that imperialism only affects people in the countries that are being exploited, but the system that brings war and exploitation in those countries is the same system that brings crisis and austerity in our countries. It is the system that has destroyed our public services and is causing millions of children in the United States, United Kingdom, and in the rest of Europe to live in poverty and grow up malnourished. Conditions are getting worse, and the presence of two distinct class interests that are opposed to each other is becoming more and more apparent. On one side, we have the filthy interests of the imperialist ruling capitalist classes, seeking to constantly increase their share of the world markets, and on the other side, the interests of working class people from all nations, seeking to peacefully coexist with each other. Unfortunately, the capitalist classes in the main imperialist countries won't allow class consciousness to arise spontaneously. They have many tools at their disposal. Mass media and even social media platforms have been shown using algorithms capable of manipulating public opinion. Or they even will turn against their own citizens and treat them as enemies, as we recently saw with the illegal detainment of American citizens returning from solidarity brigades in Cuba. But that's why organizations like ours, working class parties which are truly the vanguard of the working class movement, have the duty to embody the values of solidarity and internationalism, in order to transmit them to the masses, not only by slogans and words, but also by practical means. International solidarity and cooperation among working class parties and organizations is a practical means through which we can help the workers ditch the flag of imperialist war, and instead to fight under the flag of socialist revolution. Solidarity to the comrades of the CPUSA. We wish you a good and fruitful conference, with many more to come.
Thank you, Comrade Frassoni. We will now give the floor to Comrade Cristina Cardoso of the International Department of the Portuguese Communist Party.
Caros camaradas, enviamos as saudações fraternas do Partido Comunista Português à Conferência Internacional organizada pelo Partido Comunista dos Estados Unidos da América e aos seus participantes. Transmitimos igualmente os melhores votos de sucesso à luta dos comunistas norte-americanos, assim como de outras forças amantes da paz e do progresso social no vosso país. Tendo como pano de fundo a crise estrutural do capitalismo e a violenta ofensiva do imperialismo, o estado do mundo permanece turbulento e pautado pela incerteza. Uma situação em que se projetam o ataque aos direitos e às condições sociais de milhões de trabalhadores, multifacetados problemas ambientais, os perigos do fomento da extrema-direita e do fascismo, o incremento do militarismo e da política de guerra do imperialismo, o seu assalto aos direitos dos povos e aos princípios das relações internacionais consagradas na Carta da ONU. As forças imperialistas, lideradas pelos Estados Unidos da América, tentam fazer retroceder a roda da história em nome da salvaguarda de um domínio mundial cada vez mais desgastado e insustentável. A guerra em torno da Ucrânia, travada pelos EUA, a NATO e a UE com o apoio do G7, visa de forma assumida enfraquecer e quebrar estrategicamente a Rússia, mas insere-se no objetivo central do poder sediado em Washington de confrontar e destabilizar a China e travar o seu desenvolvimento, encarado pelo imperialismo norte-americano como uma ameaça à sua hegemonia mundial. A atual guerra na Europa está a colocar a humanidade no limiar de um conflito de consequências catastróficas. A tentativa de impor novas linhas de divisão no mundo está igualmente a contribuir para o advento de uma nova recessão económica com origem nas grandes potências capitalistas. Vivemos um tempo em que relevantes ameaças à paz, à democracia, ao progresso social coexistem com potencialidades de luta e de conquista de avanços libertadores. De facto, o mundo está em mudança. Tem lugar uma profunda e complexa rearrumação de forças à escala internacional, que contraria os intentos do imperialismo. A resistência e luta dos trabalhadores e dos povos, a luta pela paz e contra o imperialismo, afiguram-se de crucial importância. Ao valorizarmos as lutas dos povos em defesa dos seus direitos, soberania e emancipação, pela paz, contra o militarismo e a guerra, sublinhamos a importância do reforço do movimento comunista e revolucionário internacional e do fortalecimento de uma ampla frente anti-imperialista que possa deter a corrida ao abismo do imperialismo e garantir um futuro de paz e progresso social. Em Portugal, o PCP realizou no final do ano passado uma conferência nacional que reafirma a determinação de reforçar a sua ligação aos trabalhadores e às massas populares, de tomar a iniciativa e promover a luta do reforço orgânico do partido. Na véspera do 50º aniversário da Revolução do 25 de Abril de 1974, enfrentando um recrudescimento das campanhas reacionárias e anticomunistas, reafirmamos a confiança do PCP na luta em prol dos direitos dos trabalhadores e o povo português, pela ruptura com a política de direita, contra o curso da subordinação à UE e à NATO e por uma alternativa patriótica e de esquerda, por uma democracia avançada com os valores da Revolução de Abril pelo socialismo. Caros camaradas, podem estar certos de contar com os comunistas portugueses na luta que continua.
Thank you, Comrade Cardoso. We will now give the floor to Comrade Albert Blasco, the International Relationship Secretary of the Communist Youth of Catalonia.
Dear comrades of the Communist Party of the USA, the JSC, the Communist Youth of Catalonia, sends warm greetings across the Atlantic and congratulates you for this conference. We stand in solidarity with your struggles because ending capitalism, imperialism and the exploitation of the working class is an international matter. We look forward to strengthening our bonds of friendship and solidarity in the struggle for a better world. We cannot speak about international solidarity without mentioning the brave US comrades of the Lincoln Brigade that came here to our country with the rest of the international brigadiers to fight for freedom, socialism and a republic against fascism during the Spanish Civil War. Catalonia will be eternally grateful to all of them. For us, there is no internationalism without respecting the sovereignty of peoples around the world. Each nation, with its own reality, must make its own decisions and its own revolutionary process towards the liberation of the working class. Here in Catalonia, the struggle for national sovereignty and the struggle for the liberation of the working class are the same struggle. That's why we as Catalan working class youth are very aware of the sovereignty of all peoples and its right of self-determination against imperialist or centralist powers. That's internationalism. We are maybe from different nations, but we are the same class.
Thank you, Comrade Blasco. We will now give the floor to Comrade Arnaud Pic, International Relationship Secretary of the Communists of Catalonia.
Dear comrades, receive warm greetings from Communists of Catalonia. We want to congratulate you for this great initiative. In these days of change of international relations paradigm, the collapse of international liberal order, it is important for us Marxists to analyze it. Last year, we made this analysis. The massive sanctions that were supposed to collapse the Russian economy and force the Kremlin into a negotiation that put an end to the war have not worked. First, they have only been applied by those countries that call themselves international community, but they actually make up 1/5 of the world population, that we simplify as Western. Likewise, the facts reinforce the idea that Russia has decided to disconnect from the West and to look to Asia as the center of a new multipolar world order. Within the Western Bloc, there is a complete subordination to the interest of the US imperialism. We can see a complete lack of the EU's own foreign policy, which is taking measures clearly against the interests of the European population. Imperialism is willing to do whatever it takes to remain in power, and it will make his allies pay the cost before them. This last idea has been clearly reinforced with the blowing up of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines by the US, as all the evidence shows to us, and the reaction from Europe has been disappointing to say the least. Faced with a direct attack against its strategic infrastructures by a supposed ally, its reaction has been to deny it and even absurdly blaming Russia. Imperialism is receding in most regions of our planet, with some notable exceptions, such as Georgia. The recent normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, sponsored by China, have brought peace closer to Yemen. In the month of April of this year, a rapprochement summit between the Venezuelan government and the opposition has held. Something totally unthinkable a few years ago with the Uribist government, a truly destabilizing agent of the continent. In West Africa, we also see how French positions are gradually diminishing, and the new multipolar order gives these peoples little hope of change. From Communists of Catalonia, we also see the rise of BRICS very interesting, and how people are beginning to talk about using currencies other than dollars for international trade. On the other hand, we see how Israel continues with its process of apartheid and genocide against the Palestinian population, while its own society is heading more and more clearly towards fascism, with the controversial new judicial reform. So, in summary, we see that when imperialism recedes, new paths are opened for the peoples of the world. Given this, we'll have to see the reaction of the US, how violent it will be and how its opposition to these global changes will be. Faced with this situation, Communists of Catalonia will reaffirm our commitment to peace and anti-militarism. A peace understood not only as the absence of war, but as a respect and solidarity between peoples, internationalism, and the search for justice and development for the whole of the humanity. We communists, we must work in this field as a priority and link it to climate collapse, since they are closely related. Capitalism cannot offer an answer to the collapse that is generating, other than worsening of the living conditions of the vast majority of humanity to maintain those of a very, very small minority. The international liberal order will try to prevent it by relying once again on fascism, as we have already seen in the case of Italy. In Catalonia, to achieve the right to self-determination effective, a constituent process is needed, a shared struggle for the conquest of rights and the construction of a republic. On this path, it is necessary, obviously, to overcome the actual power structures of the deep Spanish state. The articulation of a common front of the sovereignties left will eventually happen, one way or another, because it is necessary for the country and for the working class. If we are not able to build it now, a left-wing and sovereignties majority that also has an expression in the Parliament of Catalonia, it will happen later, directly to the government of Junts and PSC, the Catalan National Conservative and the Social Liberal parties. It is also necessary to build a solid organization rooted in class, which responds to the material, cultural and political needs of workers. It is necessary to criticize the limits of institutional politics, just as the lack of revolutionary perspectives has shown that it is a dead end for the world working class. Even so, it is important not to fall into dogmatism or leftism, isolating oneself from the working class as a whole. Revolutionary politics is something far away from confronting transformative movements such as environmentalism or feminism, or from denying the importance of the national question as something decisive for the working class, at least in our country. There are no magical recipes, nor are we inventing anything new. We must vindicate the Communist Party as an essential tool for the working class. The party, understood as a form of organization of our political culture, with our structures and instruments, and with our method of work, debate and cohesion, and intervention on the fronts.
Thank you, Comrade Peak. We now have a special presentation from our party's own Hello Comrade project. The Hello Comrade project is an initiative undertaken by the International Department to build our relationships with our fraternal parties by increasing people-to-people cultural exchanges. So far, the project has sent delegations to Portugal, Chile, and Cuba. And we're going to start by playing a video from the Hello Comrades project's most recent trip to Havana, Cuba.
De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Puerto voy para Mayarín. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Puerto voy para Mayarín.
Esto es parte de las actividades que realizamos para desarrollar en los niños el amor hacia la naturaleza, el cuidado del medio ambiente, y les enseñamos que las plantas son seres vivos y que necesitan agua.
El cariño que te tengo no te lo puedo negar, se me sale la babita, yo no lo puedo evitar.
From Latin America, the School of Medicine, Hello Comrades.
Cuando Juanica y Chan Chan en el mar servían arena, como sacudí el jibe, a Chan Chan le...
En esa constitución quedaron blindados los derechos LGBTI. Quedaron absolutamente blindados. Así lo dije en la asamblea el día que lo aprobamos. O sea, el día que se ratificó, porque en la asamblea se ratificó. Se aprobó en el referéndum popular.
Que veo y así no puedo llegar.
Desde el Capitolio de Cuba, un abrazo, camaradas.
De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané.
El maíz hace la función, sí, hace la función de repelente, también por eso lo hacemos con intercalamiento a la yuca, para eliminar los insectos y no dañen la plantación. Todo se utiliza. Aquí hasta la hoja se utiliza en la alimentación del ganado que vive allí, porque tenemos unos bueyes para poder arar la tierra por el déficit de petróleo.
O lo que quieran decir, pero al final de lo que digan, digan, hola camarada.
Desde La Habana, Cuba, hola camarada.
For our delegation, this has been such an impactful and inspiring trip. We learned that on issues like democracy, equality, and solidarity, Cuba operates in a higher league. We now have an even greater respect for the socialist society they're working to create.
Hello, comrade.
But along with this endless, optimistic spirit, we also saw the pain, hardship, and lack of resources that this criminal blockade is having on Cuban society. We feel the urgency of working with our allies to come up with a strategy to help end this as quickly as possible. It's been 65 years of this blockade, yet the Cuban spirit moves forward in resistance, resilience, and ingenuity. We often hear a better world is possible. Cuba shows us it already exists.
Thank you for that awesome video. Comrades Eric and Arturo, the floor is yours.
Hello, comrades. Greetings from Los Angeles here at our
Community Center, the LA Worker Center, better known as La Casa Roja or the Red House. Thank you, first of all, thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this conference. I do want to briefly explain maybe for those people that aren't familiar with our project. Our project is a project that's under the International Department. We've existed for about 2 years. The initial mission statement, I think, has been evolving over time. Originally, it was the idea of sending delegations of party members to travel around the world and connect and see and document what it's like to be an activist in a country that's very different. We all understand that this move towards socialism is something that we all have in common, but it's very particular to the time and place, the history, the traditions of every country, and we wanted to capture this. So that was the initial goal. I think that as we've gone through these other countries, we've understood that this has a much bigger potential. And what we've started to do is we started to engage in the battle of ideas. This is a great opportunity to dispel a lot of the myths, the stereotypes that most Americans have about what socialism is all about. The best way is not to respond, but rather to show in actual terms of what does it look like. You know, the issues of homelessness, the issues of democracy, the issue of authoritarianism, all of these kind of things gives us a great opportunity to do that. And so that has been an evolving mission within our project here. Like we've said, we've gone to 3 countries so far, and I think the unexpected bonus, I think, is that by going to these places, we found out that every country, every party has its unique personality, where certain strengths are brought forward and pronounced. When we went to Portugal, for example, we learned of the importance that they place on culture and engage in, especially the Avanti Festival was really inspiring. It's a 3-day festival, community festival, where they bring in an average of 100 to 150,000 people a day, you know, and families come, children come, teenagers, young people, old people. It's a festival of not only music and festival, but intellectual exchanges, forums, art galleries, and so forth. And I think our host said it best. We had a guy named Miguel who said, we want to show the world, we want to show society that the Avanti Festival is a microcosm of the society we want to create. A society where friendship and solidarity have a home, have a permanent home. And I thought that was very inspiring. When we went to Chile, the thing that stuck out was the discipline that they have. You know, I had the question is, how is it possible that for 2 generations during the Pinochet regime that the party was demonized, the leaders were either jailed or killed, and so it was a whole generation that was bombarded with communism is the worst thing. And so how can they go in 30 years from that to actually becoming this close to winning the presidency? And it's because of the discipline that they have. It's not so much the size, although they are very, very large, but the fact that everybody is pushing in the same direction. You can see the impact that this has had, not only in national politics, but also at the local level, how they engage in the community to grab hold of and change their own environment. These are the kind of things that we learned from Chile. In Cuba, I think the main characteristic that came out is how important democracy plays. It's centrality to every facet of society. And it's not just in the political area, but also like in the labor movement, in the farming collectives, even in the elementary school, there is democracy and expressed in every facet. The other thing that we learned, I think, from, at least I did, is the meaning of resiliency and ingenuity, that after wave of these challenges imposed by this criminal blockade against them, they find a way to survive, and they find a way to share the little things that they have. This is very inspiring, and I think as a result of all of this, I think the project is changing now from simply being one that goes and observes and reports to one that comes back and it needs to engage politically, not just observers, but rather as activists. And I think we're very excited about this new facet. We're streamlining and upgrading our social media team that we have, this collective, and we're trying new things that we haven't in the past. And one of these things that we want to share with you is like these 2 TikToks that we just did like a week or 2 before we went to Cuba. So if you guys can show that, we'd love to share that.
Hi, I'm at the Atlanta airport on a layover to Cuba, and it's like 2:30 a.m., so I have a little time. Some of the responses have been curiously supportive of the capitalist class and have claimed that my last video about Cuba's life expectancy is wrong, but it's right. You can verify it yourself by Googling the latest numbers from the World Bank to confirm that Cuba's life expectancy is higher than in the US. And I should probably add that Cuba's literacy rate at nearly 100% is also higher than in the US, where it's only 79%. To those who say, then move to Cuba, is this your best answer? Seriously, nobody should be afraid to acknowledge something that's working well in other places, or get angry at the suggestion that we can do so much better in the US when we put people before profits, as socialist countries around the world are capable of doing, and when we advance beyond capitalism. If you really believe in freedom and democracy, if you believe that every country has the right to self-determination, then let's work to end the US economic blockade of Cuba and allow the people who actually live there to run their country the way they see fit. And make sure to follow us and turn on notifications so you can join us as we travel to Cuba today.
Hi guys, I'm Gino, and if you guys haven't heard already, Cuba just recently ratified its new Families Code in a referendum with 67% of the vote. And this code has been described as the most revolutionary and progressive code just because of how it redefines family and also addresses the everyday lives of Cuba's very diverse and evolving population. And this is including, but it's not limited to, the rights of queer families, recognizing domestic work as labor, and also making family life way safer for children. So when Hello Comrade heads over to Cuba, we'll be exploring questions like, how have Cuban families changed over time? And how does this new Families Code address all of these different family structures at once? What are the differences between the family models protected in the US versus the family models protected in Cuba? How has Cuba incorporated queer voices in their lawmaking process? And how does the new Families Code seek to create a family life free of violence? If you guys have any questions about the new Families Code or about Cuba in general, you can go ahead and leave us some questions in the comments and also follow us so you can learn more.
So these kinds of videos are doing really, really well, and they're getting thousands of plays, but what's really important is the interaction that these posts are creating. Hundreds of comments from all kinds of people who are really excited and enthusiastic and asking things like, you can travel to Cuba? How are you doing this? How can I go? You mean there's democracy in Cuba? And so that's really, really exciting to see. And if you're sitting there somewhere on the internet right now, watching this outstanding conference of international solidarity, or maybe you're standing or cooking or doing laundry or watching this after it's over on the recording. Hi, let's talk. Or maybe you've tweeted out off the list or end the blockade. And that's great, please do that. But then I seriously challenge you to take the next step. Find an organization that's doing work that's meaningful to you. Maybe that's the National Network on Cuba. Maybe it's another organization that's working on something that you want to work on too. Maybe it's your country's Communist Party. And join. But don't stop there. It's not just so we can say we have our communist card, although it's pretty cool to have, but that's just the beginning. We can actually get Cuba off the state sponsor of terrorism list. We can actually end this criminal blockade. Take a second to really think about the inhumanity here, the human cost, the suffering. Changing this is possible, and it'll mean connecting with everyone in our communities who can get behind one single goal of ending this blockade. Let's engage with people and organizations in our communities that might not be super political, but who can understand why this just isn't right. Let's connect with healthcare organizations, on college campuses, with student and labor groups, maybe with faith leaders and with places of worship that can understand the moral bankruptcy of this blockade. Mass movements make change, but we can't build that in echo chambers, and we can't do it overnight or just by sending out a snarky, well-crafted tweet that expresses our most righteous indignation. This will take continuous, imperfect movement building that's fit for the long haul. It'll mean growing real relationships outside of our phones or computers and identifying existing centers of influence and power who we can join up with, not only reflecting our outrage with friends of the purest political forces. If an inclusive, diverse, welcoming mass movement is what we're building, you, me, and all of us have such an exciting future to look forward to. So let's join in the work. Solidarity, comrade.
Thank you so much, Eric and Arturo. We just have a few questions from the audience that I'd love to ask to you guys. The first two are, how can interested CPUSA members get involved with the Hello Comrade project? And also, what can people who aren't connected with the project do to promote working class internationalism?
Oh, you want to take it, or?
I think maybe.
Okay, yeah.
This one would be.
Absolutely. You know, this is a small project that we hope to expand. And so this coming trip is going to be the largest one yet. We took 5 originally, 7 the last one. Hopefully we'll take 12, and maybe we can keep growing, because we're trying to learn the in and outs of how to do this and do it well. So how can people get involved? First of all, you can follow us on our different platforms where we update things of what's going on. We do want to work with districts within our party in terms of getting the word out, in terms of there will be an application process, because I think there's going to be a lot of interest. There already is a lot of interest, and so we want to make it fair as possible. So that's one way. Work with your district. Follow us on the platforms. We'll be making connections and so forth. Those that aren't in the party, I think it's really important that that people, like what Eric was saying, get involved. Get involved in organizations in your community with the party. And I think it's through this process that people will get, like, not only the consciousness raised, but also the commitment to really get engaged and bring about some change. So it's growing, it's changing. So stay involved, stay connected, and we'll get back to you.
I would say one more thing for the second question. Also, I think the question was how can you get involved if you're not part of the Hello Comrade project, or maybe also if you're not a part of the party. I would say a really great thing in internationalism specifically. I would say, like, pay attention to what's happening on an international stage. Read about what's happening in different countries and with communist parties in different countries. I think it's sometimes easy to kind of silo ourselves, but to understand that we're a part of the international communist movement. And there are like plenty of resources if you just kind of look around to see what's actually happening, and that we're not just isolated kind of units trying to figure out what to do on our own. We can work together, and that's really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both. And speaking of your future plans, our last question asked, where does the Hello Comrades project plans to go next?
We're actually going to decide that within the next 2 weeks. The criteria we always use is not like where do we want to go, but rather where do we need to go. And I think that that's determined by like what's happening in a country, or is anything significant? What's impactful? Where do we need to go and record and create content? So that's like our primary criteria. But also one of the other factors is go to a continent that we haven't gone to yet. Like, for example, we've gone to Europe, we've gone to Latin America, and I think we will probably go either to Africa or Asia, somewhere an Asian country, Middle East maybe. But anyway, that'll be determined within the next a couple of weeks. So we'll be announcing and hopefully, get the word out and let's get ready.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to hearing more. Thank you, comrades. And we will now give the floor to Comrade Juan Carlos Marsan Aguilera, Deputy Head of the International Relations Department of the Communist Party of Cuba.
A good segue.
Dear comrades, it's a pleasure for Cuba and its Communist Party to exchange with you who always accompany us in defense of peace and our sovereignty. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this international conference conveyed by the U.S. Communist Party. Today in Cuba, our cadres and leaders of the party undertake different tasks in the midst of a cruel and unjust economic war. The effects caused by 243 measures imposed by the Trump administration and maintained by President Biden have intensified the economic, commercial, and financial blockade that constitutes the main obstacle to the development of our country. The policy of maximum pressure continues to characterize the bilateral relations with the United States. The inclusion of Cuba in the spurious list of state sponsors of terrorism, the financial and economic persecution, and the application of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act caused serious harm to the Cuban population. Cuba is also harassed by a media campaign that seeks to discredit and destroy our revolution. That's why it's so necessary to increase activism and articulation in social networks and digital spaces to confront those leaders. While the Latin American region is working to achieve social justice and integration, the United States is reactivating the Monroe Doctrine, which is now 200 years old since its proclamation. At the United Nations, 185 countries have expressed their total rejection to the blockade policy. Cuba deeply appreciates these attitudes, as well your statements, your multiple actions on social networks, the caravans of cars and bicycles, the rallies and demonstrations. Cuba will never reject socialism. Our revolution will continue to move forward, demonstrating the strength of our Communist Party and the firmness of the Cuban people.
Thank you, Comrade. We will now give the floor to Comrade MD Shah Alam, President of the Communist Party of Bangladesh.
Dear Comrade President, Communist Workers' Party and guests from different countries of the world participated in this international seminar organized by Communist Party USA. On behalf of the Communist Party of Bangladesh, we congratulate and thank you for this important arrangement. The world today is facing a terrible war. The threat and danger of nuclear war has increased. The arms race has increased more than ever. geopolitical activity has reached aggressive and higher levels. The G7 and Western Europe, led by US ruling class, are unable to tolerate the process of developing multipolar world. The Western world, led by US ruling class, is strengthening and expanding NATO as well as building military alliances in different parts of the world. American imperialism is imposing neoliberal economies on country after country under its sole leadership. It is using racism, extreme nationalism, religious conflict, and communalism. For that, our party considers that neoliberal economies is anti-democratic, against labor interest and public interest, anti-secular, not environmentally friendly. It contains for the content of fascism in its essence. It is the main enemy of democracy, progress, human liberation. Against this, it is now necessary for the communist parties of whole world, workers' parties, environmental protection forces, peace-loving and progressive forces to embark on a program of greater exchange, mutual communications, and joint action. The multidimensional contradictions prevailing in the world are need to be utilized by realistic world communist parties, and at present I mention these brief opinion on behalf of the Communist Party of Bangladesh in this international seminar. Congratulations and thanks to all. Long live Communist Party of USA, long live Communist Party of Bangladesh, workers of the world unite. MD Shalom, President, Communist Party of Bangladesh.
Thank you, comrade. We have also received a message from the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, which I'm going to read aloud. Dear comrades, on the occasion of convening the International Conference of the Communist Party USA, on behalf of the Committee for External Relations of the Central Committee of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party, as well as on my own behalf, I would like to convey our warmest greetings and best wishes to the International Conference, its members, and all American working people. We highly value the special attention of the Communist Party USA during the past years and proactive contribution to the struggle for the protection of rights and benefits of working people of the United States of America. We are confident that the Communist Party USA will achieve greater success in the implementation of the set directive policies of the party for the prosperity of the American working people. May the relations between the Lao People's Revolutionary Party and the Communist Party USA be further strengthened for the benefits of people of the two nations, as well as for the cause of peace, friendship, and cooperation for development in the region and the world at large. Comradely regards, Thong Savan Phom Vihan, member of the Party Central Committee, Chairman of the Committee for External Relations of the Central Committee of the Lao People's Revolutionary Party. Thank you very much for your message, comrades. We will now give the floor to Comrade Bert de Belder, representing the Department of International Relations of the Workers' Party of Belgium.
Dear comrades of the CPUSA, a red salute from the Workers' Party of Belgium, better known as PTB. In Belgium, we are currently mainly engaged in struggles on social economic issues and rights of the broad working class, as these are coming more and more under attack in the context of the poly-crisis the world is experiencing today. And with the mobilization of that same working class, with its trade unions and with the active involvement of our party, it is possible to fight back and obtain victories. We have been at the forefront of the fight for higher minimum pensions and for the maintenance of early pension systems for workers in high-risk and heavy-duty professions, as these are all under attack. And at the same time, the PTB discovered
that in the various parliaments we have in Belgium, the MPs had allotted to themselves extra pension bonuses, by far exceeding the legal maximum pension. This scandal caused an outrage among the common people and fueled their anti-establishment sentiments. And we, at the BTB, contrast this serve-yourself attitude of the elites with the serve-the-people attitude both in and outside Parliament, and we launch a campaign to tax the rich. Jobs, working and living conditions of the working class are also under attack. An emblematic case is that of the outsourcing of retail shops of the multinational company Delhaize, threatening the salaries, the job security, and the working conditions of some 9,000 workers. They are currently in their 11th week of collective action against the management, and last week 25,000 trade unionists marched through the streets of Brussels to support them in their principled position and fight to save their jobs. And of course, we are also very concerned about the war in Ukraine, with the militarist stance of NATO, the EU and their member states, including Belgium, as we are concerned about the new Cold War against China. More than a century ago, the famous French poet and novelist Anatole France said about the soldiers in the First World War, "On croit mourir pour la patrie, on meurt pour des industriels." You are told that you are fighting and dying for your country, but in fact, you are dying for the greed of war profiteers, the arms industry, the military-industrial complex, big bankers and speculators. Indeed, at the losing end of the war in Ukraine are the working class, the common people, and the global south, who are faced with higher energy bills, skyrocketing food prices, scarcity, and austerity measures. That's why we say that the only honorable and just victory we want in this war is peace. And that's why we demand from our governments to invest in an active peace policy, in dialogue, and in negotiations. With an internationalist appeal for workers' rights, for peace and solidarity, we wish you success with your international conference. Good luck.
Thank you, comrade. We now give the floor to a special presentation prepared for us by JT Chapman, better known as Second Thought, on the issue of the ongoing Ukraine war. The CPUSA calls on the US people to demand the Biden administration change course immediately. War is never an acceptable solution and must be rejected in the strongest terms. The present crisis has been long in the making. The historical context reaches back to the end of World War II, the Cold War, and the formation of NATO. However, the issue roiling today's strife is the fact that the presence of NATO and US bases, military forces, and missile systems put Russia's western border under continual threat. Over the past decade or so, Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, Romania, and Estonia have provided a home to these formations, maintaining a constant war footing. This is in complete violation of agreements made at the end of the Cold War that NATO would not expand eastward. We, the members of the CPUSA, unequivocally join with peace forces around the world in demanding no expansion of NATO, no deployment of troops, no war on Ukraine, no war on Russia, no war, period. The future of the planet depends on it. Comrade Chapman, the floor is yours.
In late February of 2022, Russia officially began what it has since called its special military operation in Ukraine. While this event marked a significant escalation in violence between the two countries, it was not where the conflict began. Nearly a decade ago, the United States and European imperialist powers backed a far-right coup in Ukraine that overthrew the elected government and installed a puppet regime on the border of the US's Cold War rival. At the time, This was seen as a clear provocation by the United States, and an attempt to gain a foothold to launch an eventual proxy war in the region, a reality which has been conveniently swept under the rug in recent years. But even this thinly veiled threat cannot be considered the true beginning of the conflict. We'd have to go all the way back to the illegal dissolution of the Soviet Union to really understand the root of the problem. The undermining and eventual destruction of the original socialist project, the brutal and sadistic economic shock therapy that followed, and the fragmenting of what had once been a strong and united people. The moment the Second World War ended, the United States began preparing for conflict with this burgeoning new economic power. The Soviet Union was rightly seen as a shining alternative to capitalism, and was a ray of hope for millions of average people around the world. And so the United States began its long process of trying to kill this hope, drafting war plans, and even considering a preemptive nuclear strike. This is the context in which we must analyze the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What tends to get lost in mainstream coverage of this war, or any conflict that benefits the imperialist powers, is the human cost of war. Those who sign the papers and make the decrees that send entire generations into the meat grinder will never hold a gun themselves. They'll never lose a child to geopolitical jockeying. Their lifestyle won't be affected. They won't lose their homes to shelling. Their pantries will remain stocked, and their water will always be clean. But that is not the reality for the people being sent to fight, and the loved ones they're desperately trying to protect from pointless escalation and random acts of cruelty inspired by the hate and bitterness of war. As with any active conflict, exact numbers are closely guarded by the combatants, but there's no hiding all the footage that makes its way to Telegram, Twitter, and other more democratized online news sources. Conservatively, tens of thousands of people have been killed since last year, including civilians, as well as mercenaries flying in from Western countries to hunt their fellow human beings for sport. We've seen horrific footage of homes destroyed, bodies burned beyond recognition, and what looks like evidence of chemical weapons. War is a dirty, bloody business, and it only benefits the ruling class of the involved nations. The conscripts shipped off to fight in some leveled city have no chance of elevated status. Their lives won't be improved by butchering their fellow workers. They will be lucky to return home at all, and most of them with scars both physical and mental that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, those at the top talk of democracy, freedom, national determination, and invoke some mythologized past to fool the peasants into thinking they're dying for a noble cause. They are not. There must be a peaceful resolution to this conflict. We have seen in recent months that the United States remains the primary obstacle to peace in the region. As China attempts to broker a peaceful resolution, the US and its lackeys call ever more loudly for increased weapons shipments and greater Western involvement. Thankfully, this conflict has coincided with the sharpening of contradictions surrounding the US. The once untouchable global hegemon is losing its grip on the rest of the world. Countless Latin American and African countries have broken ties with the US and accepted more mutually beneficial trade agreements with China. Even those countries which the US expects to be loyal, like France, are expressing doubts that the United States is a reliable partner, and are beginning to shift towards the East. What we see as a result is a desperate attempt by the US and its staunchest allies to weaken its economic adversaries by encouraging proxy wars in Eastern Europe and Asia. So far, China has not taken the bait, and instead has stepped into its role as a key negotiator, recently securing peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, contributing greatly to ending the war in Yemen, and now, with any luck, helping to peacefully resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It has become increasingly apparent that as the US empire declines, it will become ever more violent and militaristic, a dangerous situation for the rest of the world, as the United States remains the only country on Earth to have used nuclear weapons on human beings. And they did it not once, but twice. The Communist Party of the United States, and the masses of people both here and around the world, must call unanimously for an end to US involvement not just in Ukraine, but in the South China Sea, in Africa, in Latin America, and everywhere the US war machine has extended its tendrils. We must unequivocally say no to US involvement and no to imperialist war, always. Enough blood has been spilled desperately trying to maintain an economic order that does not serve the people. Capitalism and imperialism remain the greatest evils of our time. And if we are to secure a better future for all of us, it must be dismantled. And we can start by demanding a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine.
Thank you, Comrade Chapman. We now give the floor to another special presentation prepared for us by Luna Oy, known for raising internationalist consciousness with regards to Vietnam and for translating Vietnamese Marxist works into English. Luna Oy, the floor is yours.
Xin chào các đồng chí. I want to begin by thanking Communist Party USA for inviting me to speak at this important occasion. It is an honor and a privilege to be heard by so many comrades around the world. Please allow me to send my warm greetings to every comrade in our international community of communism. As we've heard in the presentations of so many other comrades here today, these are challenging times for the movement. The forces of capitalist imperialism wage not just war and oppression against the working class, but now threaten the very planet with ecological devastation, which is rooted in greed and exploitation. President Ho Chi Minh once said, in today's era, as long as there is imperialism and colonialism, there is still the risk of war. War stems from the very nature of capitalism and imperialism. War is companion of imperialism. Just 50 years ago, the imperialist USA bombed Vietnam, in their own words, back to the Stone Age, sprayed toxin onto our farmland and burned our forests with napalm. But we did not surrender to the brutal onslaught of those illegal wars on conquest and imperialism. Generations of Vietnamese rose up and together defeated the imperialist troops and their puppets and gained true independence and freedom for our people. Unfortunately, that struggle has not yet ended. It is still going on, but on a different front. Nowadays, capitalism in general and imperialism in particular always seek to adapt to the rapid and complicated changes of international economic and political relations. Imperialist nations now use their wealth and soft power to sabotage legitimate attempts to build independence and self-determination in imperialized nations. If soft power is not effective enough, then the imperialists resort to destabilization, war, terrorism, and chaos from the inside with the purpose of weakening their target into submission. These battles rage through capitalist media propaganda, through social media campaigns, and through more nefarious programs of interference and clandestine meddling, which cause so many problems for the victims of empire. No matter what schemes that the imperialists use, the nature of imperialism has never changed. Imperialism always exists economically as a monopoly and politically as an opposing force to democracy and peace. If you are anti-war, you must be anti-imperialism. But this raises a question. Since the imperialists are so powerful, how can we, the poor working class, fight against them? My country, Vietnam, is just one country among many which have found the answer, and it's a simple answer. In order to fight against imperialism, to stop wars, the working class needs to unite together. Communist parties must be formed and united to build a solid mass movement which are collectively driven by class consciousness and scientific socialism. Only through communist revolution can capitalism and its imperialist programs be effectively combated. As individuals, we are nothing, but together we are undefeatable. This is why famous communists and socialists all around the world, such as Marx, Engels, Lenin, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Fidel Castro, and so many others, have always advocated for internationalism. Being a communist and socialist means that you are also an internationalist. You fight not only for yourselves, not only for your own nation, but you are fighting for the whole of humanity. We have to overcome misunderstandings and build peace movements which call for an end to all imperialist wars and intrigues. That is why I am glad there are events like this one, forums where communists from around the world can come together to share our visions and our struggles, our victories and our concerns as equal comrades. Millions of Vietnamese people, including my own family members, witnessed the pain and trauma that the war brought to innocent people. But we did not struggle alone. We received material and spiritual aid from our comrades in Laos, Cambodia, China, and the Soviet Union, Cuba, and so many other nations where socialist internationalism had taken root. As a result of a long struggle through wars which we never wish to fight, we Vietnamese people have come to treasure peace. We've fought enough wars to understand how precious peace is. But recently, with the rising new threat of a new Cold War, the future of the working class is at risk, not just in Vietnam, but around the planet. Cold War 2.0 is a fitting name for this new era of instability and imperialist brinkmanship. The Cold War of the 20th century never truly ended. It had just transitioned into a new stage of development. Communists and socialists all around the world need to be educated and prepared to lead and struggle in this new era. Organized workers' parties are a prime target for imperialist powers around the world because they know that when the working class joins together through class consciousness and class struggle, we are very powerful. We are the biggest threat to capitalism and the biggest hope for the oppressed masses of the world. We need to organize together and make real change. Remember that you are not alone and you must not act alone. We must unite into a united front across national boundaries to fight against capitalism, imperialism, and fascism. This has been proven time and again in Vietnam, in China, in Cuba, Laos, and in so many other places where workers have risen up in communist revolution. When the workers of the world unite as an organized proletarian mass movement, guided by sound theory, which is tested and refined through practical struggle, we win. And so, I do have a hope that communism will win. But before I close, I must also address one deep concern which I believe my comrades in CPUSA share and which I believe you can address. Something that saddens me is that there is almost no peace movement in the USA at all, despite your nation currently being centrally involved in so many wars, interventions, and bombing campaigns around the world. Vietnamese people will forever remember the protest movement which sprang up in the USA during the Vietnam War when tens of thousands of US citizens protested against the illegal war being waged on us by the USA. And we are forever thankful and respect those Americans who stood up to support us in a country on the other side of the earth. I hope that we, the communists of the world, can build a similar peace movement today and demand that the capitalist war machine divest itself of the gruesome profits of war. I encourage the CPUSA and other socialists across the USA to come together to build a real peace movement, to stand against US imperialism and interventionism and warmongering, and to take a stance against the brutal war machine of the US empire. During the early 1930s, as the Nazi Party was coming to power, the Communist Party of Germany printed posters with a simple slogan, against fascism, hunger, and war. They were in the belly of the beast that was the Third Reich. Today, you are in similar circumstances. You find yourself in the belly of the beast, which is the United States Empire. I want to express my gratitude and my encouragement for American communists who continue to take a stand against fascism, against hunger, and against war. Solidarity to all my comrades in the USA and around the world. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Luna. We will now play a summary statement from our international department.
We would like to thank all the speakers, organizations, and parties that participated in the CPUSA's second ever international conference. Your contributions were invaluable, and we could not have done it without your help. The significance of our movement lies in proletarian internationalism. The unity of the working class across national borders presents a threat to those that would prefer us divided, because we are more powerful together. The antagonist of the Cuban people that attempts to destroy the victories of their revolution is the very same that orders strikes to be broken here in the US. It is the same that tries to militarily encircle China, and the same that orchestrates conspiracies against governments that choose to serve the people rather than the interests of capital. The only way to fight such a force, the force of capital, is to unify. We must understand that otherwise seemingly separate and atomized struggles are components of a larger class struggle. We hope you all found the presentations of today's conference educational and inspiring. We must take what we've learned back back to our own communities and build an organization that is capable of standing up for the interests of the working class and standing against imperialism. It is a tough fight, no matter where you are, but it is not impossible, and it begins with solidarity. Thank you all for attending, and we wish you all the best in this shared endeavor.
Thank you all for attending the 2023 CPUSA International Conference. We are so proud of the work put in by many comrades around the world to prepare the presentations you all watched, and we hope to have educated and inspired you all. Remember to join the party at cpusa.org/join, and remember that you can contribute to the work of the International Department by going to redworldreview.org/donate and redworldreview.org/sign up. Now, please all rise for the Internationale.